Hello everyone. Today we are going to dive into 7 real-life cases, each of which has garnered public and media attention. While investigating each of these 7 cases, the detectives faced some challenges. However, evidence, witness testimony, and in some cases, surveillance footage eventually made it possible to get to the truth. Today we take a look at the events that took place in the American state of Florida. 28-year-old Laura Peacher was last seen on October 16, 2018, at a bar in Sebring, where she went to have dinner. 3 days later, an employee at the Tampa restaurant called 911 after discovering something strange near a dumpster. Detectives used surveillance footage to solve this case. Laura Peacher was a very attractive and always cheerful woman. She was very social. Here is what her father, Art Peacher, had to say when remembering his daughter. Laura Peacher was born on a cold Michigan day in 1989. She had an older sister and brother, a sister-in-law, and 2 nephews, one whom she never got to meet. She was born with a short left arm, with a thumb and 2 fingers on her hand. She grappled with discrimination throughout her life because of her physical difference. She was a job coach at Goodwill and worked with physically and mentally disabled people. Even though she was disabled, it never stopped her. It was part of her unique personality. Laura grew up in Michigan. At the age of 26, she moved to Sebring, Florida. She went to Florida because her grandmother was aging and could not take care of herself. Laura, who had a big heart, quit her job and went to Florida to be with her grandmother. It began with a 911 call the morning of October 19, 2018. Restaurant employees said they found the woman's body covered with a plastic bag and concealed beneath a wood board near a dumpster behind the business. A woman called 911 to report a foul odor near a dumpster in a restaurant parking lot. At first, she thought it was a dead animal. But when she got closer, she found what she thought was a dead woman. Detectives arrived on the scene. The victim was found lying face down. She was partially naked. A plastic bag was placed over her before covering her body with the headboard of the bed. She was found wearing a dress. However, the dress was pulled down below her breasts. The perpetrator tied her hands behind her back using a purse strap. Inside the dumpster, they found a clear plastic bag containing personal items, the most important of which was mail, as well as a wallet that eventually contained an ID card. The victim was identified as Laura Peacher. Detectives determined that she is not actually from Tampa and lives in the city of Sebring, Florida, which is about a 2-hour drive from where she was found. Further investigation revealed that Laura has a pickup truck, a silver Toyota Tundra. She may have come to Tampa in that truck, but her pickup truck was not in the parking lot near where Laura's body was found. The truck was entered into a law enforcement database and registered as a stolen vehicle in case any law enforcement officers saw it anywhere. Meanwhile, investigators interviewed the manager of the restaurant. The owners of the establishment had cleaned the parking lot 2 days earlier on Wednesday. The body was discovered Friday morning. That meant the body must have been placed there sometime between Wednesday and Friday. The medical examiner who performed the autopsy on Laura's body found clear marks on her neck, indicating that she had been strangled with some kind of thin, rope-like object. Other signs on Laura's body helped determine when she died. The skin was discolored, and it was clear that the body had been on the ground for a considerable amount of time. The medical examiner concluded that Laura had died on Wednesday, 2 days before she was found. At the same time, 1,200 miles away in Michigan, police broke the news to Laura's family. It was a shock to her parents. Laura's parents traveled 20 hours from Michigan to Sebring to give investigators access to Laura's trailer. Detectives wanted to see if the trailer was a crime scene. They came in and looked all over the home to see if anything unusual had happened there. However, they found nothing there. Everything was in its place. There was no indication that a struggle had taken place there, which could mean that Laura had been attacked somewhere else. Laura's pickup truck wasn't there either. The investigators knew that in order to solve this case, they needed to reconstruct the chronology of the last hours of Laura's life. They wanted to find out why Laura had traveled from Sebring to Tampa, who she had met, and where her pickup truck had gone. Detectives checked Laura's cell phone records. On Wednesday, sometime between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m., there were phone calls. When she stops answering her cell phone, it obviously indicates that something has gone wrong. Records show that on Wednesday morning, Laura made 2 phone calls to a man named Vidal Cortez. Laura's friends revealed that he is Laura's boyfriend. So a man named Vidal Cortez became the first potential suspect, and detectives wanted to talk to him. They needed to find out when he had last seen Laura and if there had been any problems in their relationship. But before they could find Cortez and talk to him, the police received information that Laura's pickup had been spotted outside a convenience store in Tampa. The detectives went to a convenience store 3 miles from where Laura's body had been found. By the time they got there, Laura's pickup truck was gone. However, there were surveillance cameras outside and inside the store, and the detectives hoped they could get some answers to some questions after watching the footage from those cameras. They saw a pickup truck pull up to the store and park. They tried to zoom in, but the quality of the footage was not the best, and it was impossible to see who was behind the wheel. After the pickup truck parked, a man got out of the passenger seat. This meant that there were at least 2 people in the pickup truck, a driver and a passenger. The man who got out of the pickup truck apparently knew he was being filmed by the cameras. He kept his head down and was wearing a baseball cap. He entered the store, but as before, the quality of the videotape prevented detectives from seeing his face. The image was too grainy. He wanted to steal the beer, but store employees prevented him from doing so. After leaving the store, the man returned to the pickup truck and sat in the passenger seat. The driver did not get out of the pickup truck, and he did not come into view of any of the cameras. About an hour later, patrol officers located Laura's pickup truck. It was parked in the roadway, and it appeared to have been involved in a minor accident. Sitting in the passenger seat was the same man investigators saw on the surveillance footage. At the time of his arrest, he said his name was Calvin Gary. He was on probation and had a tracking monitor installed on his ankle. There was no one in the driver's seat. Only a pair of shoes were left there, and it was obvious that the driver of the pickup truck had fled. Laura's pickup was handed over to forensics so they could thoroughly check it for any evidence, and the detectives meanwhile began questioning Calvin Gary. He said he'd gotten the truck from a man who went by the name Hot. Hot had recently come to the neighborhood, and they were going to steal beer from a convenience store. Detectives asked Calvin Gary if he knew how Hot got the pickup truck. He replied that he didn't know the answer to that question. He said he didn't know anything about Laura. He claimed he had no idea what happened to her. He told detectives that Hot was an African-American male, relatively short in stature. Calvin Gary also told detectives where they could find Hot. They went to the specified address. When they saw them, the man, who was not tall, hid in a thicket of bushes. He hoped the detectives hadn't seen him, but he was wrong. They asked him to come toward them. When the man emerged from the shrubbery, he was wearing a shirt and pants, but no shoes. Detectives asked him to identify himself, but he was uncooperative and would not give his name. The detectives then asked him to walk over to the car. They had special equipment that allowed for quick fingerprint identification. When detectives scanned the man's fingerprint, a match was found in the database. His real name was Gary Danielle. He had an extensive criminal record. He'd already been in prison 3 times. Another notable fact was that Gary Danielle was from Sebring. Mind you, Laura also lived in Sebring. Danielle was shoeless, and detectives assumed he was the one driving Laura's pickup truck. Recall that when the police found the pickup truck, they found shoes inside. Thus, all of these circumstances made Gary Danielle a suspect in the Laura Peacher case. However, at that point, the police did not have enough evidence to charge him with anything, and the detectives had to let him go. They turned their attention to Calvin Gary, the man who, along with Gary Danielle, used Laura's pickup truck. Because Calvin Gary had an ankle monitor, law enforcement was able to track his movements. They discovered that Calvin Gary had never been to the dumpster where Laura's body was found, and he had never been to Sebring, where she lived. Based on these facts, the police eliminated Calvin Gary as a suspect. After detectives found and interviewed Vidal Cortez, Laura's boyfriend, they ruled him out as a suspect because he had a reliable alibi. But he told detectives that on the evening of Tuesday, October 16th, Laura had visited a bar in Sebring. Because Laura had been at the bar the night before her own death, this information interested detectives, and they went to the bar to speak to the establishment's staff. The manager informed detectives that Laura frequented the bar to grab a bite to eat since she lived somewhere nearby. The last time she was there was on the evening of Tuesday, October 16th. She was friendly and smiling as always, and there was nothing out of the ordinary in her demeanor. Detectives were able to find out that there were surveillance cameras inside the establishment that recorded everything that happened in the bar. They watched the video, which confirmed everything the bar manager said. Laura was wearing the same dress she was found in when the body was discovered. She was sitting at the bar. She was talking to a waitress who was working at the time. She had dinner, she hadn't ordered alcohol, and nothing strange was happening. She did not meet anyone, spoke only to a waitress, and left around 11 p.m. During further investigation, detectives learned that about 4 hours after Laura left the bar, the witness saw her with a man he described as Shorty. Around 2:45 a.m., the witness saw her at a gas station outside a convenience store on the other side of town. Laura was sitting in her pickup truck and was fine at that point. She looked normal, and there was no indication that she was in trouble or that she needed help. The witness also testified that Laura drove off with Shorty. The investigators went to the gas station, as it was the last known place Laura was seen alive. They started looking at the surveillance footage and saw a familiar face. At 2:54 a.m., Gary Danielle went inside to buy cigarettes. He spoke to another customer before leaving. Footage from another camera showed Laura's pickup truck backing out of the parking lot before pulling onto the highway. The footage made it impossible to say whether Laura was inside the pickup at that moment, whether she was okay, and whether Gary Danielle was with her. But it all backs up a story told by an eyewitness who said he definitely saw Gary Danielle and Laura Peacher together at a gas station near Sebring early Wednesday morning. Investigators analyzed items found in the dumpster, looking for clues that could link Gary Danielle to Laura's murder. There was a partially torn ATM receipt, but it contained information that allowed law enforcement to pinpoint that it was one particular ATM at a gas station in Lakeland. According to the information on the receipt, the transaction was made at 3:30 p.m. Wednesday, 12 hours after Laura was last seen in Sebring. The detectives went to the gas station where the ATM they were interested in was located. They hoped that the surveillance footage would bring them closer to solving the case. Looking through the footage, they saw Laura's pickup truck, but it was impossible to see who was sitting inside. Luckily, there were multiple cameras. After the pickup was parked, the detectives saw Gary Danielle get out and head to the store. He withdrew money from the ATM, bought a soda, and then left the store. Laura did not get out of the pickup truck and was not seen, so detectives assumed she was dead by this time. Gary Danielle got back into the pickup truck and drove in the direction of where Laura's body was found. Gary Danielle was taken to the police station for questioning. At that point, the police only had evidence that Danielle had used Laura's pickup truck, so they began questioning him about the pickup truck. Danielle said he saw an unlocked truck with keys inside and decided to use it. According to him, that's the only thing he did. He had no idea who the pickup belonged to. He said the interior of the pickup truck was fine. He didn't notice anything strange. The detectives then showed him a picture of Laura and asked him if he knew who was in the picture. Danielle replied that he did not know the woman. Detectives asked him if he had ever met Laura in Sebring. He said no. They then informed him that they had a recording made at a gas station in Sebring. The tape has him on it, and the tape has Laura's pickup truck on it. Danielle realized that the police suspected him of Laura's murder, and so he refused to answer any further questions. Detectives at the time had no physical evidence that could prove to a jury that Gary Danielle killed Laura Peacher. There is a certain time frame within which a person must stand trial. That clock starts counting down after the suspect is arrested. Since the detectives were still waiting for the forensic results, they decided to let Gary Danielle go. Of course, there was a big risk, because Danielle could go on the run, but the detectives decided that in this case the risk was justified. Forensic analysis answered a lot of questions. The experts found drops of Laura's blood in the back seat of her pickup truck. Based on this, Laura's body was probably in the back seat of the pickup truck at some point after she died. Or it could mean that the crime occurred directly in the pickup truck. Investigators have obtained a forensic report on items found near Laura's body. DNA was found on the strap used to bind her hands, and it matched Gary Danielle's DNA. His DNA was also found under Laura's fingernails. The DNA results and surveillance video were enough to press charges, so Gary Danielle was arrested. Danielle said nothing at the time of his arrest. He exercised his right to remain silent. He was charged with first-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and carjacking. Based on the evidence, the investigators tried to build a timeline of the last hours of Laura's life. They knew that Laura was in a bar in Sebring. She was alone and left the bar at approximately 11 p.m. She then went to the town's center, where she met up with friends. That same night, she met Gary Danielle. They had never met before, and there was no connection between them. Investigators believe Laura agreed to give Gary Danielle a ride, possibly in exchange for cash. Because Danielle refused to answer questions, investigators do not know under what circumstances he and Laura met. But they did know that Laura Peacher and Gary Danielle ended up at a gas station where an eyewitness saw her alive and unharmed in a pickup truck. Apparently, something happened after they left the gas station. Laura was strangled in her own pickup truck. Where the pickup truck was at the time of her death is unknown. 12 hours after Laura's pickup truck was last seen in Sebring, surveillance cameras captured it at a gas station 25 miles outside of Tampa, where Danielle was withdrawing money from an ATM. Danielle then drove to Tampa. He hid Laura's body next to a dumpster in a restaurant parking lot, and it was found 2 days later. It took almost 3 years after Laura's death before the trial took place. The delay was caused by the world situation. Laura Peacher's father waited a long time to confront the man responsible for his daughter's death. In court, the father did not condemn Danielle, but instead used his words to talk about the young woman who was lost. Her father recounted a story about a young boy who pointed out her short arm. Another boy told her he had asthma. Her response, "Don't you know there's something wrong with everyone?" Her father brought to court some items that belonged to his daughter. Her journal was among them, emblazoned with the words, "Live the life you've imagined." She jotted notes in it about how she hated cooking because she lived alone and there was no one to do the dishes. She wrote about how she hated littering. She wrote about her 4 tattoos. The most meaningful was a blackbird, in honor of a sister-in-law who died, and inspired by the Beatles song. On August 24, 2021, Gary Danielle pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In an agreement with state prosecutors, 50-year-old Danielle pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 30-year prison sentence. He also admitted to charges of evidence tampering and grand theft of a motor vehicle. Short, gray-bearded, bald, handcuffed, and wearing orange, Danielle stood quietly in a jury box during the brief court hearing. He said nothing to Laura Peacher's family. The guilty plea punctuated the case, but it left questions unanswered. Among them, why was Laura murdered? And how did she meet Danielle? Share your opinion in the comments, and thanks for watching this video to the end. Today, we will look at events that took place in the American state of California. In 2011, 23-year-old Daylene Carlson moved from Idaho to Stockton, California to attend college. She was living at the home of her aunt Maggie and was looking forward to starting a new phase in her life. However, on August 6, 2011, Daylene went out to meet some friends but never returned home. Her aunt tried to call her several times starting at 3:30 a.m. on August 7th, but there was no answer. Concerned, she reported Daylene's disappearance to the police. An investigation was launched and detectives used CCTV footage to get to the truth. Daylene was getting ready for her Saturday night outing. It was still 3 months before college started, and her cousin Cecily had plenty of time to introduce her to the local nightlife. They were going to go to the Finnegan's pub and meet up with a few more friends there, but Cecily had a fever and decided to stay home. Daylene went to the bar alone and had to be home by 1 o'clock in the morning. But when 1 o'clock in the morning came, Daylene still wasn't home and her Aunt Maggie became worried. She called Daylene several times, but there was no answer. Maggie stayed up all night, occasionally placing a call to Daylene's number, but as before, her niece didn't answer. Maggie tried to find some reasonable explanation for why Daylene hadn't come home. She suggested that her niece might have stayed overnight at a friend's house, but it was morning, and Daylene still hadn't come home, so Maggie realized she couldn't wait any longer and called the police. The police took a report, but they hoped that Daylene had stayed at a friend's house after the party and would show up soon. The detectives decided to wait a little longer. In the meantime, Daylene's family began their own investigation. They spread the word about Daylene's disappearance on social media and asked anyone who knows anything to contact the family or the police. It was out of character for Daylene to just disappear without warning anyone, so her family suspected something bad might have happened. The day after Daylene's disappearance, August 8, 2011, the police launched an official investigation. The first place the detectives went was to her Aunt Maggie's house. They wanted to see Daylene's room, talk to the family members, and make sure that none of them were involved in her disappearance. Daylene was a typical American girl. She was young, attractive, with big plans for her future, and her disappearance was highly unusual. Detectives checked Daylene's room, but nothing indicated that she might have run away from home. All her belongings and some documents were in her room. A photograph that Cecily took the night she disappeared showed Daylene wearing a brown and white striped top and ripped jeans. Cecily told detectives that Daylene had planned to visit the Finnegan's pub and that they had often been there before. So the next stage of the investigation for the detectives was a visit to the bar where they wanted to speak to the staff and possibly get some new information. The bar manager remembered seeing Daylene in the street around midnight on the night she went missing. He recalled the events of that night but didn't remember anything out of the ordinary. Fortunately, there were security cameras. Surveillance footage doesn't always tell the whole story, but they can go a long way in an investigation. The bar had 2 working security cameras that captured hours of footage from Saturday night. It would have taken a long time to review the footage, So the detectives decided to get a copy of the recordings and review all the material back at the police station. They hoped this would allow them to find out who Daylene had spent the evening with and, most importantly, who she had left the bar with. At first glance, there was nothing unusual on the tape. Young men and women gathered on the street, chatting and smoking. It looked like an ordinary Saturday night in a bar. However, one girl in the crowd catches their attention. She is wearing a striped top like the one in Daylene's last picture. Of course it's Daylene. The detectives follow her movements to see what happens next. At 0:41 a.m., she returns to the bar. There's another surveillance camera inside, in the hallway near the restrooms. Detectives watch the footage until 0:41. 6 minutes later, she appears in the footage. Daylene is drinking. She may have been a little more vulnerable than usual. She's the only woman in a hallway filled with young men. Every person in this footage is potentially a suspect, and if not a suspect, a potential witness. Daylene looks happy and relaxed. As the tape scrolls, the detectives notice that someone is about to get too close to her. At 0:48 a.m., a young man is seen approaching her from behind and putting his arm around her waist. Moments later, she walks into the restroom. A man with a goatee and wearing a cap worn backwards walks further into the frame. Daylene didn't seem particularly bothered by this young man's presence, but neither did she seem overly pleased to see him. Immediately after viewing this footage, the detectives realized that they had to track down this man. So they spoke to members of her family and her friends once again. They found out that the man who had his arm around Daylene's waist was Jason Gilley. Daylene, her cousin Cecily, and her friends knew Jason well and often gathered at his house for a fun night out. Detectives located Jason Gilley's residence and met with him. They asked him questions about his whereabouts the night Daylene disappeared. Jason said that he had spent the evening at a bar with Daylene and that he had intended to take her home. However, circumstances forced him to leave early because he needed to look after his child. Jason said he returned home alone. He said he left the bar at about 1 a.m. and returned home at 1:30 a.m. because his young son was sick. He mentioned another potential suspect. Jason hinted to the detectives that they should talk to Jacob Evangelisti. According to him, Daylene was dating Jacob Evangelisti. But 4 days before she disappeared, Daylene and Jacob had gotten into an argument right in front of Jason. The detectives were interested in this information because jealousy often drives people to rash actions, so they decided to find out more about who Jacob Evangelisti was. While going through Daylene's social media pages, the investigators found some recent photos of Jacob. They decided to take another look at the security footage from the bar to see if Jacob was there. They switched the footage to the moment Daylene exited the restroom. At 1:06 a.m., Daylene went outside again and approached the man leaning against the wall. His presence seems to cause a dramatic change in Daylene's behavior. She is moving her hands very vigorously and appears to be very angry about something. The detectives try to see if it could be her boyfriend Jacob, but his face is impossible to see because of the bright lights. They spoke briefly, and after a few seconds, Daylene left. The detectives continue to watch, trying to identify the mystery man. Finally, when he turns to face the camera, they realize it is Jacob Evangelisti. Detectives brought Jacob Evangelisti in for questioning. During the interview, Jacob seemed very agitated. The detectives asked him to talk about his relationship with Daylene and when and under what circumstances he last saw her. Jacob said that the last time he and Daylene had seen each other was at Finnegan's bar. Jacob added that Daylene had broken up with him that night at the bar. According to him, he didn't want to end his relationship with Daylene at all. In fact, he was very upset that she had broken up with him. According to Jacob, sometime later, Daylene left the bar without him. He insisted that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. The detectives then go back to the CCTV footage to see if they can corroborate his story. At 1:09 a.m., Jacob enters the bar. They continued to watch. After a few minutes, Daylene appears in the frame. She appears to be saying goodbye to one of the customers. Then, at 1:15 a.m., she leaves the frame. The detectives continued to review the footage until all the customers had left and the bar had closed. By 2:38 a.m., the lights go out, the parking lot is nearly empty, and neither Daylene nor Jacob appear again. At this point in the investigation, it seemed that Jacob was the one responsible for Daylene's disappearance. Perhaps he couldn't get over the fact that she had left him. But so far, investigators have no proof that her disappearance was a foul play. Meanwhile, Daylene's family is conducting their own search. They made up flyers and started posting them around the city. They wanted as many people as possible to know about Daylene's disappearance. Someone might have seen her after she left the bar. Someone might know what happened to her. At the Stockton police station, detectives questioned Jacob Evangelisti once again, but he insists as before that he knows nothing. Instead, he gives another name. He said Daylene had a new boyfriend, James Cozens. James is another member of Daylene's social circle. Although James was not technically Daylene's boyfriend, they did have a relationship. Another interesting fact was that James was a close friend of Jason Gilley. In fact, they lived in the same house. It was very curious that Daylene could enter into such a relationship and then disappear almost immediately afterward. This raised great suspicion about James and the possibility that he was somehow involved in her disappearance. James was invited to the police station and asked to talk about his relationship with Daylene. He admits that he and Daylene had a relationship, but he claims to know nothing about the night she visited the bar. James stated that he was out of the city at this time. The police began checking his alibi, but James had information he wanted to share. He told detectives that the night Daylene disappeared, she sent him a text message saying she was with some new guy. James showed detectives his phone, and there were indeed messages from Daylene. She wrote that she was leaving the bar to go to a friend's party. Although the identity of the friend remained a mystery, detectives had a new theory. Daylene wanted to keep the party going, and to do that, she presumably needed to go to either the liquor store or the grocery store. Investigators compiled a list of 24-hour liquor stores. The closest store to Finnegan's was called Food for Less. Detectives went there and found that there were security cameras inside and out. If Daylene was here, she was caught on tape. The detectives started looking at the footage from the outside security camera. Their hunch was right. They saw Daylene enter the store with a young man, but who was he? The footage only showed his back, and so it was impossible to identify him accurately. The detectives began to review the footage from the other cameras and waited until Daylene and her mysterious companion bought something that looked like a bottle of alcohol. They switched back to the outside camera and waited for them to exit the store. At 1:31 a.m., the couple leaves the store and detectives get a clearer picture. The goatee and baseball cap worn backwards matched the first face the detectives captured in the bar footage, Jason Gilley. Once they saw this, they had a new lead for their investigation. Jason originally told investigators that he left Finnegan's bar alone and was home at 1:30 a.m. caring for his sick son. Police now had clear footage of him leaving the liquor store with Daylene at 1:31 a.m. The fact that Jason had lied about leaving the bar alone meant that he immediately became the #1 suspect. A week after Daylene's disappearance, police arrested Jason Gilley. The detectives waited about 1 hour before they began questioning him, watching his behavior change. Without revealing that they have a tape of Jason's nighttime shopping trip, the detectives revisit Jason's version of what happened that night. They asked him to remember what time he got home from the bar. Jason lied again, saying that he left the bar around 1 a.m. and went home to check on his son after receiving a text from his grandmother. At this point, detectives informed him that they had spoken to his grandmother and that she denied texting him that night. Jason then admitted that his grandmother had not contacted him and said that he went home alone to be with his son. When asked who he left with, Jason again insisted that he left alone and went home. Once he lied again, the detectives realized he was digging himself a hole he could never get out of. They said they had surveillance footage that disproved everything he was saying. At this point, Jason admitted that he left the bar with Daylene, went to Food for Less and bought her a bottle of Jägermeister, but said he drove her back to the bar before going home. When detectives asked him why he lied about an important fact like the fact that he left with Daylene, he said it slipped his mind. According to Jason, he offered Daylene to spend the night on his couch, and she accepted. He admitted that they had drunk a bottle of Jägermeister and that he and Daylene had had intimate contact. He explained that afterward, Daylene got upset, said that it shouldn't have happened, and walked home. Through tears, Jason told a new story about how he was driving Daylene home early Sunday morning when they had an argument. He got into his grandmother's car and picked her up on the corner near his house. Shortly before they got to where Daylene lived, she tried to get out of the car. Daylene was angry and spent the entire ride, which lasted 30 to 45 minutes, demanding to be let out of the car. She told Jason he was horrible and a piece of garbage, and said she couldn't believe he had done this. According to Jason, when he pulled over, Daylene got out of the car and ran. That was the last time he saw her. Jason then demanded an attorney, and that was the end of the interview. The police didn't have enough evidence to press any charges against Jason Gilley and had to let him go. Jason was released on August 18, 2011, and on August 22, he went to the police station to report his wallet lost or stolen. Detectives investigating Daylene's disappearance were quite surprised to see him. Detective Robert Fain saw Jason and asked him to accompany him and retrace the route he took the day Daylene disappeared. Jason agreed and showed the detective the spot where Daylene allegedly jumped out of the car and ran away. The detective asked Jason why he did not try to catch her, and Jason replied that the car behind him was honking and he needed to go home, so he got back on the freeway. Jason then said that he had been looking for Daylene for about 10 or 15 minutes, but he had to leave because he was almost out of gas. He drove to Arch Road in Stockton to get gas. With no new leads, the detective visited the gas station. Fortunately, there were surveillance cameras there. Surveillance video showed that Jason stopped at the gas station near the Arch Road exit on Highway 99 in Stockton at 10:46 a.m. on August 7, 2011. He was alone, and it was 9.5 hours after he was last caught on camera at the liquor store with Daylene. At first glance, there was nothing out of the ordinary in Jason's behavior, but the casual gesture demands close attention. Jason looks dirty. There is dirt on Jason's arm and shirt. At one point, he is seen shaking off his shoulders. This behavior looks highly suspicious. Jason walks back to his car, but before leaving the gas station, he checks the passenger door, then gets in the car. 20 seconds later, he opens the passenger door again and quickly slams it shut. In his own words, Daylene was the last person to use that door. Finally, he drives off. After viewing this footage, detectives have a new theory. They hypothesized that Jason drove Daylene to a field somewhere south of Stockton, physically dragged her out of the car in such a hurry that the front passenger door didn't close properly. They believed Daylene was no longer alive, but to arrest Jason, they needed proof that Daylene was dead. Jason was walking around free, giving interviews to reporters, and Daylene was still missing. Then, on October 15, 2011, when more than 2 months had passed since Daylene's disappearance, a turning point came in the case. In a field 20 miles outside of Stockton, a farmer made a sad discovery. Here's what court documents say about the day the remains were found. On October 15, 2011, human remains, which were later determined to be those of Daylene, were discovered in a cornfield about 64 feet from Lone Tree Road in the Escalon. Sarah Yoshida, a senior criminalist with the Department of Justice, was dispatched to the crime scene that afternoon. Yoshida found several bones, including a skull, rib bones, a jaw, numerous vertebrae, and foot and leg bones. She also found a human torso and a clump of hair. A black bra was found in the area between the remains and Lone Tree Road. 5 .22 caliber cartridge cases were found just southeast of where the human remains were found. Dr. Bennett Omalu, a medical examiner for San Joaquin County, was called to the crime scene around 9 p.m. that night. He saw the body and requested that the ground underneath it be excavated 18 inches. The soil was secured in a body bag and x-rayed. 2 .22 caliber bullets were located in the excavated soil. Dr. Omalu performed an autopsy on Daylene's remains. He opined that Daylene was shot in the cornfield where her remains were found, and that the bullets went through her body and embedded in the soil directly underneath her, or stayed inside the body and fell out as the body decomposed. There was a gunshot entrance wound to the back of the head. Daylene's fingers, fingernails, and jewelry were entangled in her hair, and based on that and the location of the gunshot wound, Dr. Omalu opined that Daylene had her hands and fingers around her head when she was shot. Dr. Omalu concluded that Daylene died as a result of a gunshot wound of the head, and gunshot wounds of the trunk were contributory factors to her death. He also opined that the decomposition of her body was consistent with her being deceased on August 7, 2011. Investigators had a prime suspect in Daylene's murder. According to court documents, detectives also discovered that Jason had access to a Jennings .22 caliber semi-automatic handgun that belonged to one of his family members. The gun was seized, and ballistics testing left no doubt that Daylene was shot with that gun. Jason Gilley was arrested. When he was finally behind bars, investigators built their theory about how events unfolded the night Daylene went missing. On the evening of Saturday, August 6, 2011, she went to a bar to meet some friends. Jason Gilley was among them. He somehow convinced Daylene to go to his house. They stopped by a liquor store on the way to Jason's house. This is where Daylene was last seen alive. Judging from this footage, nothing was bothering her, but after she and Jason left the store, events began to occur that led to her death. When her body was found, Daylene was naked. This led authorities to believe that she did not want to become intimate with Jason, but he forced her to do so. That was the only thing that made sense as a motive, but it was impossible to prove that theory because of the severe decomposition of the body. Authorities believe Daylene told Jason she would report it to the police, so he put her in his car and then drove many miles past her home and turned into a field where he took her life. In November 2013, Jason Gilley was convicted of Daylene's murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. He attempted to appeal the sentence, but was unsuccessful. Today we discuss the events that took place in the American state of Texas. 21-year-old Julie Ann Gonzalez was a young mother from Austin who disappeared in March 2010 under mysterious circumstances. Julie was last seen alive on March 26, 2010. Her family became concerned when they did not hear from her during the day. Julie's aunt went to the police and reported her disappearance. It was a very confusing case, and to find out the truth about what happened to Julie, investigators examined digital evidence. The last text messages that Julie sent were very strange. They contained inconsistencies. They contained spelling mistakes and slang that was not typical of her way of speaking. After Dora, Julie's aunt, reported her missing, a police officer was dispatched to her home. Dora said that no one in the family had seen Julie since the morning of Friday, March 26, 2010. They had planned to meet for lunch that day, but Julie did not show up. This was odd, as she had always honored the arrangements. If she had a change of plans, she would have given notice. That same day, a police officer met with Julie's mother, Sandra. The officer told Sandra that the police had received another call related to Julie. Her husband, George Dela Cruz, with whom she was separated, had called the police and said that Julie had failed to show up for a meeting to pick up their joint daughter, Layla. Julie's family immediately realized something was wrong, as she could not abandon her daughter. Now we need to go back in time to learn more about who Julie was, how she met George, and how their relationship developed. I also want to warn you that the information I'm about to give you is not my speculation or fiction. It is information posted on the Texas District and County Attorneys Association website, so it can be considered the official version of the authorities. So I'm quoting from the Assistant District Attorney's report. George Dela Cruz and Julie Ann Gonzalez met while attending Crockett High School in South Austin. After graduation, the young couple moved into a place of their own. After about a year, they had a daughter, Layla, who was the center of Julianne's attention. The young family relocated a couple of times as they struggled to make ends meet and eventually moved in with George's mother, Victoria Dela Cruz, and his 3 younger sisters. After a few years of dating, George and Julianne got married in May 2009. Though they married, Julianne was not happy with George, and she struggled to make the relationship work. She was ambitious and hardworking and wanted financial security. She had received a scholarship to attend St. Edward's University, but dropped out after she became pregnant with Layla. Needing to financially support her family, Julianne began to work at a Walgreens in East Austin as a cashier. She enrolled in a pharmacy tech school, eventually earned her pharmacy tech degree, and was promoted to the Walgreens pharmacy. Unlike Julianne, George was not motivated and seemed satisfied with living at home with his mother and sisters. George did not have steady employment, working on and off as a security guard and construction worker. He spent the majority of his time playing video games on his Xbox and spending money on his gaming addiction. Julianne was not happy about George playing Xbox for hours on end while she worked, and she voiced her concerns to him when his gaming interfered with his responsibilities as a father. It became commonplace for Julianne to come home from work and find George playing on his Xbox and their infant daughter wearing dirty clothes with a soiled diaper. After a few months, Julianne realized that she had made a mistake in marrying George. She and Layla moved out of the house and into her grandfather's place in Dripping Springs. She filed for divorce in December 2009, only 7 months after they married. So we can conclude that George and Julie's relationship was doomed to failure. He liked living with his mom, he didn't want to work, he didn't fulfill his fatherly duties, and all he was interested in was video games. Unlike him, Julie wanted to develop, she studied, she worked, and she took care of her daughter. There was another important person in Julie's life that cannot be left out. In the Assistant District Attorney's report, not only is Julie's relationship with her husband George described, but also her relationship with Aaron Bro. Pay special attention to this photo. It shows Julie and Aaron. This picture will play an important role in the investigation. Now I'm going to read information from the Texas District and County Attorneys Association website that I've already mentioned, and this information too can be considered the official version of the authorities. I quote, "When Julianne was in high school, before she met George, she worked at her grandfather's taco stand and convenience store. She was a responsible and hard-working employee, friendly, personable, and well-liked by the customers. While working at her grandfather's store, 17-year-old Julie became friends with a co-worker, Aaron Bro, who was 23. The longer they worked together, the closer they became, and a mutual love interest began to develop. Julianne's mother, Sandra Soto, kept a close eye on them and noticed that her teenage daughter was getting too close with an older man. Sandra confronted Julianne and Aaron about the nature of their relationship and made it clear that they could not see each other romantically given the difference in their ages. When it was evident to Sandra that Julianne and Aaron continued to pursue a relationship, Sandra met with Aaron and fired him from her father's store. This ended their relationship, and Julianne was upset and heartbroken. Several years later, when Julianne's marriage to George had begun to deteriorate, she ran into Aaron at the grocery store. Happy to see each other, Julianne and Aaron embraced, chatted for some time, and exchanged contact information. Soon after, they began to email back and forth and arranged to go on a date. It was evident that their feelings for each other had resurfaced, and their affection was strong despite the passage of time. Excited about their reconnection, Julianne and Aaron began to see each other romantically. Julianne confided in Aaron that she was not happy in her marriage and was going to file for divorce. As their love grew for each other, Julianne and Aaron made plans for their future, moving in together, getting married, and having children. They were like-minded. Aaron, like Julianne, was ambitious, hardworking, and responsible, and he had goals for his life, his own apartment, and steady employment as an electrician. Knowing that Julianne was not legally divorced and that George was not taking their breakup well, Julie Ann expended great effort to keep her relationship with Aaron a secret from her husband. She introduced Aaron to little Layla as her friend, and even made it a point to not use Aaron's name around the little girl so that Layla would not inadvertently mention him to her father. She also marked her MySpace page private so that only her friends could view it. Once she separated from George, she deleted him as a friend. So from the report, it is clear that another man has come into Julie's life. She carefully hid the relationship and filed for divorce in December 2009. But 3 months later, she disappeared. On her social media accounts, Julie wrote that she was happy. She wrote in her account that she couldn't wait for Layla's return because she missed her so much. She posted this entry on March 24, 2010, 2 days before she went missing. She was supposed to pick up her daughter from George's house, but never did. After the family reported Julie missing to police, investigators began interviewing her friends and family. During their interviews, they discovered that on the afternoon of Friday, March 26th, after she was last seen, Julie sent text messages. These messages stated that she had voluntarily left for Colorado with a man named James. Evidence indicated that this was a routine missing person investigation and that Julie had indeed left of her own free will. However, Julie's family couldn't believe that she could leave her daughter Layla, leave her new boyfriend Aaron, leave her entire familiar life. Since Aaron was one of the last people to see Julie, investigators talked to him. He reported that, like Julie's family, he was confused. According to him, Friday morning when he left for work, everything was fine. Then, at about 2:30 p.m., he received a text message from Julie that said, "Aaron, I can't do this anymore." He immediately tried to call her, but she didn't answer. Then, on Saturday morning, Aaron received another message. Julie had written, "Aaron, I didn't mean to hurt you. I want to be truthful with you. You're a good guy, just not for me." Aaron was confused. He asked Julie why she was dumping him via text, to which Julie replied, "It's too hard. I'm sorry, I tired. It's too hard. I want to be truthful. You're a good guy, just not for me." When investigators talked to Julie's friends and to Aaron, they had no reason to believe that anything was wrong with her or that she was in danger. The messages were sent from Julie's cell phone, and it looked as if she was actually hiding of her own free will. On March 27, 2010, the next day after she was last seen, Julie posted a message on a social media account saying that she was fine and that she did not want to be disturbed. The next day, March 28th, Julie's Aunt Dora got in her car and started driving around the neighborhood. She stopped at the Walgreens store near her house and looked into the parking lot. Julie's car was parked there, but Julie herself was not in the car or in the store. A detective who arrived after the 911 call examined the outside of the car and looked inside, but there was nothing of note. The discovery of Julie's vehicle was an important aspect of the investigation. During the inspection, it was determined that Walgreens did not have any exterior surveillance cameras, however. They were installed inside the premises. Law enforcement officers reviewed the surveillance footage from the security camera installed at the entrance of the store. However, it did not capture Julie's appearance. Because of this, it was unclear at that point whether she had left the car in the parking lot by herself or whether someone else had done so. Someone who wanted and hoped that Julie's car would not be found for as long as possible. It's very strange, but the police did not seize Julie's car for forensic examination. The police later admitted they made a mistake. The only potentially important witness that investigators have yet to talk to was Julie's husband George, with whom she was living separately, and I will remind you that she filed for divorce 3 months before she disappeared. Julie's family learned from George that she had asked to keep Layla for a few days. However, Julie's family did not believe his words. They believed that Julie would not have left Layla with George for a long time. Layla was the most important person to her. Julie was a very responsible person, unlike George, who still lived with his mother and did not have a steady job. He spent all his time at home playing video games. A detective went to George's home to talk to him. George said he last saw Julie on Friday, March 26th, and that she told him she wanted him to keep Layla, their daughter, because she had some things to do. She did not return to his home again to pick up Layla. George allowed the detective to go into the house and look around. There was no sign of her presence inside, no evidence of a crime, nothing to be alarmed about. Once again, the police began to suspect that perhaps Julie was fine and just didn't want to be found. But soon, investigators began to doubt this. Before her disappearance, Julie was an active user of social media. She had many postings on MySpace. But 2 days after her disappearance, Julie stopped texting and posting on social media. This was highly suspicious. Time passed, but there was no progress in the investigation. In May 2010, 5 weeks after Julie was last seen, the case was transferred to the homicide unit. Other investigators began to delve into the case and started checking out the people who were closest to Julie. The police knew that Aaron had a relationship with Julie. The night before she disappeared, they had spent together, and so Aaron became a suspect. Investigators decided to re-interview him. Here's what the assistant district attorney's report says about Aaron's testimony and what happened the day Julie disappeared. I quote, "The night before, Julie Ann spent the night with Aaron at his apartment. They had had dinner and stayed in watching movies. Early the next morning, Aaron woke up Julie Ann when he was heading off to work to tell her that he loved her. She asked him to take the day off and spend it with her since she didn't have to work that day, but Aaron had to decline. He would not get paid if he skipped work. So he kissed Julie Ann goodbye and told her that he would see her later that evening. After Aaron left, Julie Ann handwrote him a long love letter where she told him how much she wished that he was still cuddling with her in bed and that she loved him very much. Julie Ann expressed how happy she was to be in a relationship with him and that he made her feel special and beautiful. She looked forward to getting married and having a son together. Julie Ann left the letter for Aaron on his bed, then she left to pick up Layla at George's house. Aaron never heard from her again. The assistant district attorney's report also indicates how Aaron perceived the text messages Julie sent him, and I quote, "Aaron was not convinced that it was Julie Ann who was sending those text messages. He challenged the person with Julie Ann's cell phone to text Aaron his middle name. The response was, 'I don't have time to play games.' Throughout Aaron's workday, he continued to call Julie Ann, but she would not answer his phone calls. Later that day, he read her MySpace post that she was going to Colorado with a web designer named James and that she hoped James would show her a good time. This new development upset Aaron, so he began frantically calling her. Finally, Aaron texted Julie Ann and gave her an ultimatum. If she did not call to explain what was going on, their relationship was over. Julie Ann never responded. When Aaron got home from work that evening, he discovered the handwritten love letter. He was confused and did not know what was going on or what to believe. Thus, it is obvious that Aaron immediately had doubts that Julie was the one who wrote the text messages. Also, don't you think it's odd that when asked for a middle name, his interlocutor wrote, "I don't have time to play games"? Writing a name would be a lot quicker than writing that sentence, wouldn't it? We can assume that whoever wrote the text messages on Julie's behalf did not know Aaron's middle name. It didn't make sense that Julie would write a love letter to Aaron on paper and then a few hours later send him a text message on his phone telling him she was leaving with another guy in Colorado. This was an obvious red flag for investigators. Something was wrong because apparently Julie had no reason to leave. In order to finally clear Aaron of suspicion, the investigators suggested that he take a polygraph test. He did not hesitate to agree to this and passed the test without any problems. Julie's case was unusual from the start. The police had no crime scene, no physical evidence. All they had were digital traces. So the authorities decided to take a closer look at the digital evidence again and try to understand the real reason for Julie's disappearance. The Austin Police Department brought in Jim Cook, a digital forensics expert, who began to look at all aspects of the case. During this time, Julie's family did everything they could to bring as much attention to the case as possible. The family made flyers with her picture on them and hung them all over the city. Information about Julie's disappearance was posted on billboards. They hired a private investigator to interview anyone who might have information about what happened to Julie. The family held fundraisers and vigils and invited local media. But unfortunately, all the efforts made by the family at that time did not help to get closer to solving Julie's disappearance. Digital forensics expert Jim Cook analyzed the grammatical features of language to compare the way Julie wrote text messages before and after she disappeared. Before she disappeared, she spelled words correctly. She had upper and lower case letters, had correct punctuation. And then, after Julie disappeared, there were misspelled words, missing punctuation marks. It was obvious that the language pattern before and after Julie's disappearance was different. This suggested that the text messages were not actually written by Julie, but by a criminal who had taken possession of her phone and who was trying to cover his tracks. After analyzing Julie's bank transactions, investigators found an important lead. On the day Julie disappeared, Friday, March 26th, her bank card was used to pay for items at a Walmart about 3 miles from where her car was found. Now, to provide you with the exact wording, I'm going to quote again from the Assistant District Attorney's report, which states, "Police detectives analyzed Julianne's bank records and discovered that the day that Julianne disappeared, her debit card was used to make purchases that were processed as credit, not debit transactions. This was significant because her bank records showed that Julianne's habit was to make PIN-required debit transactions with her card, not credit transactions." Detectives went to Walmart and McDonald's where the transactions were made and reviewed surveillance video to see if Julianne had made these purchases. The video showed George pushing a grocery cart with a grocery bag and Layla inside. Julianne was nowhere to be seen. The video's timestamps were minutes apart from transactions on Julianne's debit card. George never mentioned that he and Layla had been to Walmart on the day of Julie's disappearance or that he had used Julie's bank card. It was becoming increasingly obvious to the investigators that George was someone they needed to take a closer look at. They decided to look into Julie's relationship with George in more detail and found a lot of disturbing data. The report states, to track the movement of Julianne's cell phone, detectives enlisted the assistance of Jim Cook, a cell phone expert, to analyze Julie's cell phone records. Because George's cell phone service was disconnected, Cook tracked only Julianne's phone movement via cell site towers. He found that on March 26th, the day Julianne disappeared, and through March 27th, her phone was in the vicinity of George's house for extended periods of time. There were over 100 texts and 20-plus data connections during this time period, which was uncharacteristic of the phone's past activity. Usually, Julianne's cell phone would depart from George's house within a few minutes of arrival. Cook also found that on March 26th, Julianne's phone was in the vicinity of a particular Walmart and McDonald's where her bank card was used and where George was captured on surveillance video. Later that evening, the phone was in the vicinity of a Best Buy where George was purchasing Xbox equipment using his store credit and account. All of the incoming calls for Julianne on the morning of March 26th were either not answered or diverted to voicemail. This was not typical of her call history before that date. There was no more cell phone activity on Julianne's phone after March 27th. Plus, her phone never left the Austin area and had never traveled to Colorado, as her MySpace post claimed. In fact, Julianne had never placed a call to, nor received a call from the state of Colorado. So, as we can understand, George's name has been coming up more and more in the investigation. But that's not all. Detectives learned that George was taking it hard when Julie decided to divorce him. He tried to manipulate her. Here's what the report says about that. As George realized that he was losing Julianne, his mental well-being deteriorated. The two did not spend the Thanksgiving holiday together in 2009, and after that, George sought Julianne's attention by claiming to have amnesia from an accident at work. He acted like he did not recognize her or Layla, ignoring and keeping his distance from his daughter on one particular visit, even though she was happy to see her dad and was trying to get his attention. George eventually admitted to Julianne that he had faked amnesia. Another way George sought Julianne's attention was by attempting suicide. In January 2010, 2 months before Julianne disappeared, she picked up Layla from George's house. George told her that there was a note in Layla's diaper bag, and George asked her to read at a later time. Julianne left the house and stopped her car to read the note, which turned out to be a suicide letter. Concerned for his safety, Julianne rushed back to George's house. He had taken some pills, and Julianne called 911. Medical personnel were able to save him. On a number of occasions, George arrived unannounced at Walgreens, where Julianne worked. He'd just hang out in the lobby, making it difficult for Julianne to concentrate on her job. Her supervisor, Melinda Burrow, noticed George's stalking and constant calling and became concerned for Julianne's safety. Melinda asked George to leave the Walgreens store, and George complied. Julianne confided in Melinda that she was worried and felt that George was up to something. Once, Julianne called Melinda when she was in her car and said that George was following her in his own car. Julianne said that if something ever happened to her, it was him, meaning George. During child exchange interactions, George gave Julianne a hard time and tried to keep her from leaving his house, sometimes restraining her by the arms or blocking the doorway. He went as far as jumping on Julianne's car as she tried to drive away. His increasingly odd behavior forced Julianne to ask family members to accompany her when she was going to drop off or pick up Layla. She also asked the family law court for supervised visits for Layla, as she was concerned for her daughter's safety. George agreed to have his child visitation schedule coincide with his mother's work schedule so that his mother would be home whenever Layla was with him. Julianne filed for divorce in December 2009, 3 months before her disappearance. George repeatedly refused to sign the divorce papers and waiver of service, telling her that he did not want the divorce. Before Julianne was able to hire a process server to serve George with papers, she disappeared. George was the last person to see her alive on March 26, 2010. The next business day, Monday the 29th, George finally signed the divorce paperwork and filed it with the district clerk's office at the downtown courthouse. There were obviously a lot of red flags indicating that George couldn't accept that Julie had decided to start a new life without him. And of course, it was highly suspicious that he signed the divorce papers the very next business day after Julie disappeared. Jim Cook, a digital forensics expert, examined George's digital footprints and found something suspicious. George played video games every day, sometimes 18 hours a day. However, on the day Julie disappeared, March 26th, George had a 20-hour period when he wasn't using his Xbox. This was atypical for him. The police only had circumstantial evidence, and so they were in no hurry to arrest George. They needed more evidence. Meanwhile, Julie's family continued to do everything they could to bring as much attention to the case as possible. They attended the Dr. Phil show, and it played a key role in the investigation. Here's what the Assistant District Attorney's report says. I quote, "Sandra and her sister Margarita even appeared on the nationally televised Dr. Phil show in California to raise awareness of Julianne's disappearance. George, too, appeared on the show. He reiterated to Dr. Phil what he had previously told police, that when Julianne showed up at his house, she was acting strangely, and asked him to continue watching their daughter because Julianne had some stuff to do. George further agreed to take a polygraph test on the show. After failing the polygraph, George became extremely emotional and continued to deny that he had any involvement in his wife's disappearance. Concerned for his well-being, Dr. Phil offered to connect George with a mental health professional upon returning home to Austin. George accepted Dr. Phil's offer, and immediately upon returning to Austin, he checked himself into the Austin Lakes Hospital for a mental health evaluation and remained at the hospital under observation for a few days. So George fails the polygraph test, and this leads his own mother to believe that George may be involved in Julie's disappearance. It's a very important moment that had important ramifications. The report says that Victoria, George's mother, called the police after the Dr. Phil show. I quote, "The turning point in the investigation came after the Dr. Phil show, when George's mother, Victoria, became concerned that her son may have had something to do with Julianne's disappearance. While her son was at the mental health facility, Victoria learned from her daughter's boyfriend, Javier Carrasco, that there was a trench under the storage shed in her backyard, furthering her suspicions about her son's involvement. She then called police to examine the trench. With Victoria's consent, the property belonged to her. The police searched the home and yard, with the exception of George's bedroom. Days later, police secured a search warrant for the entire property, including George's bedroom. Though police did not find any evidence of blood, they found various types of ammunition, latex gloves, a knife, remnants of burned clothing from a pit in the backyard, various cleaning products, digging tools near the ominous trench, and a big dirt pile behind the storage shed that was covered with a mattress and other unused household items. Inside the residence and George's room, police collected several items that were purchased with Julie Ann's debit card on the day she disappeared, including baby bath products and a child's DVD movie. Police also collected various electronic devices, computers, George's Xbox, recent Best Buy receipts, more ammunition, and a torn-up photo of Julie Ann that had been taped back together. Law enforcement officers measured the trench and concluded that it was the same length as Julie's height. The trench resembled a grave, but there was no body in it. Police interviewed George's neighbors. On the morning of Julie's disappearance, residents of the neighborhood where George lived reported problems with phone and internet service. A specialist team was dispatched to investigate the cause. The specialist came to George's house and went to the backyard. In speaking with this specialist, police determined that shortly before Julie disappeared, someone had dug deep into the ground and cut the cable, causing a temporary internet outage in the neighborhood. George may have intended to hide Julie's body in his shed, but did not do so because he damaged the cable and realized that someone might come to fix it. The examiner checked George's Xbox again and found out the IP address listed on his account. The expert then analyzed this information to determine who the IP address actually belonged to. It turned out that George was using his mother's neighbor's Wi-Fi. After that, investigators focused on Julie's MySpace entries. They checked the IP address associated with her postings and found that it also belonged to George's neighbor's Wi-Fi connection. This confirmed that George was the one who had been posting on MySpace after Julie's disappearance. So, what evidence did the police have? George was the last person to see Julie. He used her bank card. He failed a polygraph. He sent texts on Julie's behalf. He dug a grave in his backyard. He was jealous. That's the last picture of Julie, and that's the picture they found in George's phone. What the Assistant District Attorney's report on this says, I quote, "She also marked her MySpace page private so that only her friends could view it. Once she separated from George, she deleted him as a friend. Unfortunately, she remained friends with George's cousin, Ariel James, so Ariel, and eventually George too, had access to her posts. In March 2010, just days before her disappearance, Julie Ann posted a photo of her and Aaron at the Austin Zoo. After Julie Ann disappeared, a data extraction of George's cell phone, made pursuant to a search warrant, revealed that George had stored this photo of Julie Ann and Aaron at the zoo on his cell phone. After a thorough investigation, it became apparent that George was responsible for Julie's disappearance and death, and that he had bought time to dispose of her body by using her cell phone and updating her MySpace page, posing as her. But it was very difficult to make an arrest without finding Julie's body. On September 13, 2013, 3.5 years after Julie's disappearance, George was charged with murder by unknown means and was arrested the same day. The report contains some details of what may have happened the day Julie disappeared. I quote, 2 months later, as George was in the Travis County Jail awaiting trial, his cellmate came forward to inform detectives that George had described what had happened between George and Julie Ann. The cellmate, whom we'll call Justin, testified at trial that George had been venting that he and his estranged wife got into an argument because of another man in whom his wife was interested romantically. George told Justin that the argument turned physical and that his wife fell, hit her head, and was rendered unconscious. During the investigation, police discovered that George had dug the trench in his backyard before Julie arrived to pick up Layla, which means he had a prearranged plan. He had a picture on his phone of Julie looking happy with her boyfriend Aaron. George was jealous. He couldn't bear to see Julie start a new life. Authorities believed that George did not bury Julie in the backyard, but took her body somewhere out of the city. Prior to trial, the state offered George De La Cruz 50 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice in exchange for his guilty plea to murder. But he rejected the state's offer and did not make a counteroffer. George proclaimed his innocence, and through his lawyer, he stated that he did not know what happened to Julie Ann. The case against George required the jury to pay special attention to the evidence, as many pieces had to be tied together to establish the truth. To quash any doubt for jurors that Julie Ann may still be alive, the state produced evidence at trial that there was no proof of life. In this digital world, it is common for people to leave a trace of their movement and activity wherever they go. So to confirm that Julie Ann was dead, that is, that there was no proof of life, detectives and crime analysts performed frequent and automated searches in local, state, and national law enforcement databases, beginning a few weeks after she disappeared in March 2010, and continuing until the day of George's murder trial in April 2015. Police confirmed that Julie Ann did not have any involvement with law enforcement since she was last seen alive in March 2010. The jury deliberated for more than 6 hours before finding George De La Cruz guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison. He pleaded not guilty and accordingly did not say what happened to Julie or where he hid the body. To date, nearly 15 years after Julie's disappearance, her remains have not been found. George's family was outraged by the verdict. The De La Cruz family, including his mother, continued to voice their anger outside the courtroom. George is innocent. Sooner or later, she is coming back. Don't stop looking for your daughter. Look everywhere. Because she is somewhere. She is alive, said Victoria De La Cruz. In this video, we take a look at the events that took place in the American state of Indiana. Stacy DeGrandchamp was a 17-year-old high school student from Fort Wayne. On August 15, 2002, Stacy attended a party where about 20 people were present. That night, the fun turned into a physical confrontation outside the house. Stacy was taken to the hospital, but died of her injuries shortly after arrival. The case became complicated because witnesses were unwilling to testify, and as a result, it took the police 17 years to solve this case. Stacy DeGrandchamp attended Fort Wayne High School and dreamed of attending Ball State University to build a career as a computer technologist. Stacy grew up as the only child in her family, and her mom was a single mom. She was confident and beautiful. Stacy's friends described her as a popular middle school student, but that popularity had its drawbacks. Some of the other girls were jealous of her. In the spring of 2002, Stacy met Brandon Muff, a Fort Wayne High School graduate, at a house party. Brandon was in his early 20s at the time, and Stacy was 17. She was attracted to the older guy in a way. Brandon was a bad boy, and Stacy was head over heels in love with him. Stacy hung out with a group that was involved with Brandon. This group included high school party girls Amanda Richards and Whitney McGehee. The group often ended up at the home of 16-year-old Holly Boisvert. Holly had a pool at her house, and her father would let the teens swim in it, hang out, do whatever they wanted. There could have been 30 people in the house, and her father didn't mind that. Holly, Whitney, and Amanda were good friends, and they were all friends with Brandon. Stacy, as Brandon's girlfriend, started attending all the parties. But as it turned out, there was friction between Stacy and Holly that started back in middle school. One day when Stacy was in 8th grade, they all went to Holly's house together, where Stacy put her feet in the water and Holly started laughing at her splashing. This was said in front of everyone else, and of course everyone laughed. So Stacy got up and left the pool party. Over time, Stacy and Holly seemed to forget their differences. Some even thought they had become friends. However, Stacy's recent addition to the group had hurt Holly badly. The thing is, Holly had been dating Brandon even before Stacy started dating him. Brandon and Holly's relationship was in the past, and now they were just friends. But it seems that Holly thought she and Brandon would get back together. So there was friction between Holly and Stacy again, but this time Stacy wasn't going to leave. Stacy sensed that Holly was becoming more aggressive. It was a conflict of interest. Looking from the outside at the group of friends who were spending time with Stacy, it seemed like she was hanging out with the wrong people. By August 2002, Stacy had come to the same conclusion herself. Holly was spreading negative rumors about Stacy just to create more enemies for her. Meanwhile, Stacy's relationship with Brandon began to crumble. Just weeks before the start of her senior year at Fort Wayne High School, Stacy made a big decision. She broke up with Brandon and stopped seeing him. Stacy was getting ready for college, for what she dreamed of, for her future, and it wasn't all with him. She had decided to break up with Brandon and his company, except for one new friend she had met over the summer, Abby Oswald. Abby was a friend of Brandon's, so Stacy met Abby through Brandon. On August 15, 2002, Stacy was with Abby Oswald. They decided to go to the mall where Abby was going to pick out an outfit for the prom. Later, Abby suggested that Stacy go to a party that was being held at this house. This is what the place looked like in 2002. This is where Brandon lived with his roommate Justin. Stacy didn't want to go to the party, but Abby eventually managed to talk her into it. At about 9:30 p.m., Abby and Stacy pulled up to the house. Shortly before 11 p.m., the Fort Wayne Police Department, firefighters and ambulance responded to a 911 call on Guthrie Street. Area police officers had already gone to that address a few hours earlier, and it was a small party with loud music, and neighbors had called because they were annoyed by the young people gathered. The party should have been dispersed, but it was not. Officers from the police department and paramedics arrived a second time and found the young woman in the driveway. She was bleeding from her chest. She was rushed to a trauma center in Fort Wayne for treatment of injuries that proved to be life-threatening. Abby Oswald told detectives what happened. According to her, when she and Stacy pulled up to the house, Brandon and Holly were sitting on the porch together. Stacy saw Holly and asked what she was doing here. Holly and Stacy got into a verbal altercation. Eventually, they started fighting with each other. They pulled each other's hair. They punched each other with their fists. They kicked each other. They rolled around in the grass. Stacy would get the upper hand on Holly to the point where she would kick her in the head or face. Then suddenly it seemed like Stacy was going limp and losing strength. That's when Brandon decided to intervene and pull Stacy away from Holly. Brandon grabbed Stacy by her ankles and dragged her to the trash cans in the yard. Stacy stood up and staggered down the driveway. A few seconds later, she passed out. Brandon almost immediately went over to her, pulled up Stacy's shirt and noticed that her bra was soaked with blood. That's when they called 911. Holly and Brandon were taken from the scene to the police station. When forensic experts arrived, the crime scene was cordoned off. They began taking pictures and videotaping the scene. Because Stacy was bleeding from her chest, investigators were looking for a weapon. Detectives did not see any sharp objects, knives, or anything similar in the backyard or driveway of the home. After obtaining a search warrant, they entered the house and took several kitchen knives that were on the table. Meanwhile, in the hospital operating room, doctors were trying to save Stacy's life. She had suffered a stab wound to her upper chest. She also had a second stab wound to her abdominal area. Unfortunately, despite the doctors' efforts, they were unable to save Stacy's life. Because the stabbing was intentional, Fort Wayne police launched a homicide investigation. At the station, Holly shared her version of events. Holly stated that she had nothing to do with the injuries Stacy had sustained and that they had just had an argument and a fight. Holly said that she did not have a knife. She said that she thought Stacy may have fallen on the glass in the trash can. Detectives also interviewed Brandon. His shirt, stained with Stacy's blood, was seized as an exhibit. Brandon told detectives that the fight needed to stop, so he intervened and grabbed Stacy's ankles. Without realizing how hard he was pulling her, He yanked her. He tried to cite that Stacy's injuries were caused by shards of glass that were in the trash can she had fallen into. But Holly and Brandon's stories didn't match the evidence. Photos were taken of the dumpster at the crime scene, and there was no broken glass. There was no blood in or around the trash cans. It was clear from the coroner's report that the injuries were caused by a knife with a sharp blade. The injuries were described as stab wounds, but at the time, neither the scene nor any of the potential suspects had a knife. Holly and Brandon were released, but the investigation into the fatal incident remained open. On August 19, 2002, Stacy DeGrandchamp was committed to the earth. She was buried in the prom clothes she was supposed to be wearing for her prom photo. There was a full house, including Stacy's partying friends Abby, Whitney, and Amanda. Holly Boisvert was absent from the funeral ceremony. However, Brandon showed up there and all eyes were on him. He had the guts to show up. Rumors spread through Wayne High School that Brandon and his friends had tricked Stacy into attending the party so that Holly could hurt her. This made the detectives wonder if it was a conspiracy to get one of the girls to eliminate the other. After Stacy's death, no one wanted to hang out with Holly. Everyone thought Holly was responsible for what happened to Stacy. But another rumor reached the police. Some people speculated that Whitney was connected to this case. A few days before Stacy's death, Whitney left a message on her answering machine warning Stacy to be careful. A detective came to Whitney's home to question her. He wanted to find out why she had left the message. According to Whitney, her message was not a threat. It was a warning for Stacy to be vigilant, since Whitney knew that Holly wanted to pick a fight with her. Whitney wanted Stacy and Holly not to be in the same place at the same time. But if Whitney was trying to prevent Holly and Stacy from meeting, Brandon seems to have been actively trying to set them on a collision course. Detectives learned from Whitney that on August 15th, Brandon called Holly's home and said, "If you don't come to this party, I will never speak to you again." Now detectives had to try to figure out if this was some kind of trap set up by Brandon to get both girls to fight in the house. The fact that Stacy had broken up with Brandon had hurt his ego badly. But was he trying to get even with her? Maybe there was a bit of revenge in the whole affair. Holly's jealousy and Brandon's anger is what could have gotten Stacy killed. But there was one other person who played a key role in convincing Stacy to go to the party that night. Her new friend, Abby Oswald. Abby insisted that Stacy go to the party because Abby was friends with Brandon. The detectives wondered why Abby had brought her friend to the Guthrie Street house, knowing that there was a possibility that Holly was there. They suspected Abby was part of a plan to lure Stacy to the party, but when detectives spoke to Abby, she denied any involvement. Abby also said she was the one who tried to stop the fight. Since all paths led to Brandon, detectives called his roommate, Justin. A law enforcement interview with Justin took place on August 26th. Justin turned out to be a very important witness. According to Justin's account, he tried to break up Stacy and Holly, but Brandon pushed him aside and said, "No, let them fight." Brandon seemed to enjoy the fight. Justin told detectives that Brandon asked him to tell police that Holly hadn't done anything, and Stacy had just fallen. This made law enforcement very suspicious. It seems that Brandon had more credible information, but he just didn't turn it over to law enforcement. Either he was afraid, or he was trying to impede the investigation, or he was trying to cover for Holly. Brandon was eventually questioned a second time, and it was during this interview that Brandon refused to provide any other information. Brandon informed the detectives that he was not a snitch and that he had not seen Holly with a knife. The detectives were sure that Holly had committed the crime. They thought they could find a few witnesses who were willing to talk, who would tell the truth about what had happened that night. However, out of all the people who were at the party that night, not one wanted to admit that they had seen anything. Without witnesses and a murder weapon, it was impossible to arrest and charge anyone. Weeks passed, then months, then years, but the case remained unsolved. 17 years passed, but no one was ever punished for Stacy's death. Stacy's case was put on hold and nothing was done, and no one understood why. But Stacy's cousin, Jamie McMillan, wasn't about to give up and accept that the killer was getting away with it. Eventually, Jamie contacted Unsolved Cases Detective Brian Martin. In March 2019, Jamie called Detective Martin and told him that if he could talk to Brandon, Holly, Abby, and Amanda again, he might be able to get some new information, and maybe he could move the investigation forward. Everyone at that party is older now. Maybe they've rethought a lot of things in their lives, and maybe some of them will tell the truth. Detective Martin tracked down Abby Oswald first, but just like 17 years ago, Abby said she'd never seen the knife. Then the detective talked to Brandon. Brandon appeared to be remorseful, and it had been weighing on him for 17 years, but he didn't remember seeing Holly with a knife. About a month after talking to Brandon and Abby, the detective was able to locate Holly Boisvert in Wisconsin. It took Holly quite a while to open the door, but when she did, the detective introduced himself as Detective Martin from Fort Wayne and said he was working on an unsolved case. Holly turned slightly pale. The detective said he knew it had been a while and asked her if she remembered that party. While talking to Holly, there were a few things that really caught the detective's eye. First of all, Holly kept referring to Stacy as her friend. "We were terrible teenage girls, but she was still my friend, and I would never intentionally stab my friend. I wouldn't do that to her. I would never intentionally raise a knife on her. I didn't expect us to fight," Holly said. Holly then admitted that she had a folding knife at the time and often carried it with her for protection. The detective asked if Holly remembered if she had that knife with her when she had fought Stacy. Holly got up and went to the bedroom. When she returned, she had that very knife in her hand. The detective couldn't believe his eyes. He thought it might have been the weapon of a crime that the police hadn't been able to find for 17 years. He then returned to Fort Wayne to begin gathering information on this case. Although test results showed that Stacy's DNA was not on Holly's knife, Detective Martin conducted additional tests on the weapon. Eventually, he showed the knife to the chief pathologist who was investigating this case. Dr. Wagner reviewed the autopsy photos and concluded that the knife was consistent with the stab wounds that Stacy had suffered. On Wednesday, March 25, 2020, 33-year-old Holly Boisvert was arrested. After years of silence from the friends, the main witness finally decides to come forward: Amanda Richards, who was in the car with Holly the night of the party. Amanda says that Holly had a knife on her that night. The last thing Amanda remembered was Holly picking up the knife and walking toward the house.
We got to the house that night, and before we got there, Holly always had a knife that she carried with her. Well, that night, she took the knife with her, and when we got there, she had me hold it in my purse.
Who was with you when you arrived? Was that you and Whitney and Holly?
Yes.
Okay.
So as Whitney and I were getting ready to leave, Holly asked me for the knife back. And I didn't think anything of it, so I gave it back to her.
Okay.
And as Whitney and I were pulling away from the house, Stacy pulled up.
Amanda kept quiet for almost 2 decades, and she could have helped the police solve the case. What do you think about this? Share your opinion in the comments. Now police were able to piece together the evidence to get a complete picture of the events that led to Stacy's death. Brandon Muff, a former Fort Wayne High School graduate, played a key role in the rivalry between Stacy and Holly. Brandon was everything that embodies the bad boy archetype. Stacy found herself drawn to Brandon despite his obvious flaws. Their relationship marked a significant shift in Stacy's life when she began socializing with Brandon's circle, a group known for partying. Holly, who had dated Brandon before Stacy, still harbored feelings for him. This misplaced affection, combined with Brandon's manipulative tendencies, further fueled Holly's hatred for Stacy. Brandon enjoyed the attention he received from both girls, often pitting them against each other to fulfill his need for validation of his own importance. The feud between Stacy and Holly peaked on August 15, 2002. On that fateful day, Stacy received an invitation to a party. Although her close friends were concerned about which part of the city the party would be held in, Stacy decided to go. When Stacy arrived, she found Holly and Brandon together, and the encounter added to the already escalating tension. The argument quickly escalated into a fight. When Holly realized she was losing, she used a knife and stabbed Stacy twice. After consulting with Stacy's family, the Allen County Circuit Court offered Holly Boisvert a plea bargain. Holly ultimately admitted the fact that she had actually stabbed Stacy, resulting in her death. Holly stated that Brandon or Abby had nothing to do with what happened. She insisted that she had acted on her own. Jamie McMillan, cousin of Stacy DeGrandchamp, spoke in court and shared the grief of losing her and how it has impacted them over the last 19 years. "I didn't know if we would ever see this day. We continue to push harder and, thank goodness that we had a great detective on the case and we managed to pick it up and roll with it. It was something that we've waited a long time to hear her say that she actually truly did it. And her signing the plea deal was the first area where she actually was willing to sign off, stating that she did in fact do it. So now we are here today and finally getting the closure that we needed," McMillan says. On January 14, 2022, Holly was sentenced. The plea deal calls for a 25-year sentence with 5 years suspended and 3 years adult probation. Given the time Holly has already spent in prison and her good behavior, she could be released as early as 2030. In this video, we take a look at the events that took place in Kershaw, South Carolina. On December 26, 2011, 30-year-old Hope Melton called her grandmother and told her that she was driving down a rural road and that someone was following her. Hope was scared and did not know what to do. She didn't have time to give her grandmother any details because the call was cut off. To solve this case, the police used CCTV footage, thanks to which they were able to see the suspect. Another feature of this case was the poor performance of one of the authorities, which ultimately affected the outcome of the case. Beverly Hope Roscoe Melton was born December 4, 1981, in Cheraw, South Carolina, a daughter of William Roger and Elizabeth Ray Hodge Roscoe. She was an honor graduate of Chesterfield High School class of 2000, where she was a member of the Beta Club, Vocational Honor Society, Health Occupational Class, and Chorus. Hope was manager of T&T Country Store in McBee, South Carolina. She attended Lancaster Church of God, where she taught children's church. Hope had been married to Gary Lee Melton for just over a year, and they were really happy and wanted to have children, but Christmas 2011 was the last Christmas they spent together. On December 26, 2011, Hope planned to visit her grandmother, who lived approximately 30 miles from Hope's home. She was supposed to arrive for lunch, but instead, her grandmother received a call on her cell phone. It was Hope calling. In a worried voice, she informed her grandmother that someone was following her. She asked for help. The call was cut off, and then Hope's mother and her grandmother got in the car and drove to look for Hope. 5 miles away on a long stretch of country road, they spotted Hope's car parked on the side of the road. But Hope herself was nowhere to be found. Her grandmother immediately called 911. The call was transferred to the county sheriff's office. When the sheriff's office received the call, it was transferred to police officers as a missing person call. It is very important, as soon as a missing person report is received, to start acting quickly. So one of the sheriff's deputies immediately went to the scene. He took a look at Hope's car. There was no damage to it. It was in good working order. So the version of a traffic accident was immediately ruled out. Hope's purse was in the car, but her wallet was missing. A forensic team searched the car, but found no clues as to Hope's whereabouts. Volunteers and police began combing the neighborhood for any clues. Hope's shocked and distraught husband, Gary, arrived on the scene. He informed the police that Hope had planned to stop at a gas station on her way to visit her grandmother. That was the only lead the detectives had at the time. The distance from Hope's house to her grandmother's house was approximately 30 miles. There were 4 gas stations along that route, and the detectives decided to check each one in order. The first gas station visited by the detective investigating Hope Melton's disappearance had security cameras. The detective began looking through the footage, hoping to see Hope on it. According to her husband, She left the house around 11:45 a.m. The detective asked the manager to show him the footage from an hour before Hope had called her family in a panic. At 12:19 p.m., a male customer walked into the store and everything looked normal. The detective continued watching the video. 3 minutes later, a woman appeared in the frame. Hope is blonde, about 5 feet and 5 inches tall, and weighs about 140 pounds. She was wearing a pink shirt and blue jeans. The detective immediately realized that the woman in the footage was taller than Hope, and it wasn't her. They scrolled through the tape until 12:45, but Hope never showed up. That meant she had probably filled up her car at some other gas station. Hope's family was in a state of shock. They searched for plausible explanations for her disappearance. There was a faint hope that she had simply gotten stuck in the mud and left the car. Perhaps someone had picked her up and taken her somewhere for help. They hoped Hope was okay and would be home soon. Meanwhile, the detective investigating her disappearance visited a second gas station that was only 10 miles from where Hope's abandoned car had been found. There were also surveillance cameras there that could help solve the case. Upon arriving at the gas station, the detective first spoke to the manager and told him that they were looking for a missing woman. When the detective described Hope's appearance and said what kind of car she was driving, the manager recalled possibly seeing Hope around 12 p.m. A surveillance camera that had been installed outside left no doubt that Hope Melton had been at this gas station before she disappeared. She had refueled her vehicle, and it appeared that nothing was bothering her at that moment. Footage from another camera showed a man holding the door for Hope, and she headed inside. Hope paid for her gas and exited the store. She looked happy and was in a good mood. It looked like she was really looking forward to spending the rest of the day with her grandmother. When the detective watched the video again, it was not Hope who caught his attention, but the man who held the door open for her to come inside. Surveillance cameras recorded that a man in a white cap followed her into the store. He turned to look at Hope. Hope paid for her gas and left, and the detective watched the man in the cap. The man paid at the counter and left the store. Unfortunately, the footage did not show anything to help identify the man. The detective turned to the surveillance footage again, hoping he could identify this man's car. One of the tapes showed Hope walking toward the store to pay for gas. At that moment, a dark minivan pulled up, from which a man wearing a white cap got out. But unfortunately, no license plate was visible on his car. He switched to another outdoor camera to see Hope driving away from the gas station. She walked back to her car. As she was about to pull away, a gray car pulled up. A man got out of it and turned to watch Hope's car pull away. But neither this driver nor the man in the white cap followed Hope out of the gas station. The detective watched the segment over and over again, trying to catch every detail he could. He was sure that there were further clues hidden in the gas station footage, and he just had to find them. And he was not mistaken. He switches to the first camera to the moment when Hope is walking back to her car. Another car comes into frame. It's an orange Chevy. The Chevy crosses the parking lot and turns back to the exit. And as Hope pulls away, the detective notices something important. The orange car follows her. The detective assumes that he noticed the car following Hope in the lead-up to her disappearance. Having obtained evidence that Hope had been followed from the gas station, the police had to figure out what happened next. Meanwhile, the search party found frightening evidence. 6 miles from Hope's abandoned car, they found a pink bracelet and a blood-spattered blanket. The bracelet was identified by Hope's husband. He had given her the bracelet as a Christmas present. All of this raised serious concerns for Hope's well-being. After the detective watched the gas station surveillance footage that showed the orange Chevy following Hope's car, he had to make sure it wasn't just a coincidence. On her way to her grandmother's house, Hope had to drive past an office building that had numerous surveillance cameras. The detective drove there, but the building was still closed for Christmas. It took some time to find an office manager who had keys and understood the CCTV system. There were many surveillance cameras on the building for the parking lot and the road Hope could use to get to her grandmother's house. The detective's main goal was to see if the orange Chevy was following Hope or if it turned somewhere else. Since the offices were closed for Christmas, The cameras were set to record only when they sensed movement. The detective began looking at the footage shot just after 12 p.m. The detective saw Hope's vehicle appear in the frame at 12:06 p.m. 2 seconds later, an orange car that had previously been seen by the gas station appeared in the frame. The footage shows the orange Chevy traveling just a few yards behind Hope's car. Both vehicles are heading north toward the road through the woods where Hope's car was found. The quality of the footage did not allow the license plate numbers to be seen, but it is a recognizable vehicle, and police have put out an APB. It took about an hour or two before this orange vehicle was stopped by police on a street in Jefferson, South Carolina. The driver was 23-year-old local resident Nicholas Miller. There was no one else in the car besides him. He was very nervous when the police pulled him over. Perhaps he had something to hide, and so he was brought to the police station where a detective questioned him. Miller answered all questions evasively. The detective asked Miller to tell how he had spent the day, what he had been doing, and where he had been. Miller replied that he had spent the morning shopping at a Walmart store 30 miles away. He then drove back to Jefferson. Police requested a search warrant for Miller's car, and the detective investigating Hope Melton's disappearance went to Walmart, where Miller said he shopped. Police had to check his story. The store has numerous cameras recording everything that happens on the sales floor. Law enforcement officials were very happy that they were able to get video surveillance data from Walmart because it helped verify Nicholas Miller's story. He was driving an orange Chevy, and at about 10 a.m., his car pulled into the parking lot. When the driver got out, the detective saw that it was indeed Miller. So far, his story has been confirmed. He just walks into Walmart like a normal day, like hundreds of other shoppers, and nothing out of the ordinary seems to be going on. It seemed like he was just going about his normal business. He didn't take a shopping cart or shopping basket. But as the tape played, the detective realized that Miller was no ordinary shopper. He seemed to be just hanging around the store, not interested in the merchandise being sold there. Perhaps he was in the store for an entirely different purpose. At one point, the detective noticed that Miller was not moving erratically through the store, but was following a woman, a blonde woman, who was not paying attention to him, but was minding her own business. Reviewing the footage further, the detective was convinced that his assumption was correct. Wherever the woman went, Miller followed her. But a few moments later, she reappears in the footage again, and this time with a man. At this point, it would be safe to assume that Miller realized that this was an unrealistic target for him. A few minutes later, the couple leaves the store. Investigators speculated that the woman may have been lucky to escape. After a few more minutes, cameras captured Miller leaving the store. As he exits Walmart, it appears that he is frustrated because a potential target has slipped from his grasp. We can only assume at this point that he is heading back to Jefferson, where he will eventually meet Hope at a gas station. Hope's family had hoped for her safe return home, but when police obtained a search warrant for Miller's car, it was clear that something terrible had happened to Hope. While examining the car, forensic investigators saw blood spatter on the passenger side fender and on the driver's side bumper. They also found Hope's wallet in Miller's car. Now that the authorities had new evidence, the decision was made to question Miller again. It is important to note here that the interrogation was conducted by Chesterfield County Sheriff Sam Parker. Remember that name? It's important. During the interrogation, Miller began to deny his involvement in Hope Melton's disappearance, but when informed of the evidence found, Miller finally admits his guilt and agrees to take the police to Hope's body. Miller led detectives to a remote turkey farm 14 miles from where Hope's car was found. She was lying on the ground, on her back, face up, with no clothes on. It was a truly horrific scene. Miller was unable to give any explanation that could explain why he did it. Hope's family was informed of the discovery of her body. What had happened to her had forever changed the lives of those who knew and loved Hope Melton. Now police could finally piece together the events that led to Hope's death. Investigators learned that Miller had recently broken up with his girlfriend. They believe this may have been the cause of his nervous breakdown, but we'll never know for sure. At the gas station, Miller saw Hope filling up her car. It was at that fateful moment that he decided to pursue her. She had had a wonderful Christmas with her family and was looking forward to a wonderful day with her grandmother. She had no idea someone was following her. As soon as they reached a backwoods road, Hope realized she was in danger and called her grandmother. Miller admitted that he had forced Hope off the road. He pulled her out of her car and forced her into his car. He then drove her into the woods, ripped off her clothes, and of course you realize what he did after that. Miller tried to cover his tracks. He took Hope to a turkey farm where he beat her to death with a baseball bat and dumped the body. She stopped for gas, and a chance encounter with the monster ended horribly for Hope. It's beyond human comprehension. Nicholas Miller has been charged with multiple counts. In the run-up to the trial, his ex-girlfriend provided police with horrifying evidence. In photos she took, Miller chased her in his orange Chevy just hours before he kidnapped Hope Melton. Now we need to get better acquainted with Chesterfield County Sheriff Sam Parker. As I said, it's very important in this case. Parker was fired from the police force, and I'll explain why that happened. Officials say Parker gave special treatment to inmates, took property intended for the sheriff's office and used it for himself, and gave uniforms, badges, and weapons to civilians. Parker let 2 inmates sleep and live in outside the jail in exchange for doing work on his property. While in the armory, where the inmates were allowed to sleep, they had access to the internet, phones, and had unlimited, unsupervised visitors, all with the former sheriff's knowledge. Prosecutors also said Parker gave inmates at the jail special treatment that included alcohol and unsupervised visits with women. They were allowed to go shopping and dine out in restaurants. In exchange, the inmates allegedly performed work on the then sheriff's house and personal property. As a result, the former sheriff went on trial. During Parker's trial, Mike Lee, who is serving a 15-year sentence for arson, testified against the former sheriff. Lee testified while in the Chesterfield County Jail, he was able to furnish his cell with flat-screen TVs, a fridge, and a new mattress. Lee purchased the items with his own money sent from family. Lee told jurors that he would eat lunch with deputies and he was allowed to purchase and wear regular clothes instead of his jail outfit. Lee said he worked at one of the county's impound lots where he had access to internet, phones, and a Facebook account. Eventually, Lee moved out of the jail into the sheriff's armory where he had sex with a female visitor and hosted his birthday party where guests ate filet mignon and drank alcohol. A party thrown by an inmate at the sheriff's office is out of this world, isn't it? Share what you think about it in the comments. During his time in Chesterfield, Lee said he was able to take a private jet from Cheraw to Mount Pleasant to see his wife and child. Lee also testified he was driven to Florence, South Carolina, along with another inmate by a deputy in a marked sheriff's car to meet a female friend for a lunch date. Lee explained how he became very close with Parker by working at his home, going to church with Parker, and giving gifts to Parker's daughter. In 2014, Parker was found guilty on 5 counts of misconduct in office, 2 counts of giving contraband to inmates, and 1 count of embezzlement, and was sentenced to 2 years in prison with the possibility of parole. As the judge prepared to hand down Parker's sentencing, the former sheriff became emotional, apologizing to the people of Chesterfield County, family, and friends. After the verdict, Parker apologized to his family for embarrassing them and to his fellow law enforcement officers. As I mentioned earlier, it was Sheriff Sam Parker who interrogated Miller when Miller confessed to the crime and led the police to Hope Melton's body. Miller was facing the death penalty, but because of the sheriff's actions, prosecutors were unable to seek the death penalty. The fact is that during the interrogation, the sheriff promised Miller that if he confessed to the crime and told what happened to Hope Melton, he would not face the death penalty. The sheriff had no authority to make such a promise to a suspect. Miller believed the sheriff and confessed to the crime. In doing so, Sheriff Parker compromised the case. In a release, Solicitor Dan Johnson said former Chesterfield County Sheriff Sam Parker severely jeopardized the case. Johnson said Sheriff Parker got a confession from Miller under the illegal promise he wouldn't seek the death penalty. As a result of Sam Parker's gross misconduct in coercing Nicholas Miller's confession with a promise of leniency, all statements made in reliance on that promise would be properly suppressed at a trial in this matter, Johnson said in the release. In March 2015, 26-year-old Nicholas Miller pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Hope Melton's family members were outraged and angry at the former sheriff, who had been convicted of corruption the year before and put the case in serious jeopardy. Hope's mother, Elizabeth, said they were somewhat disappointed and that they had hoped for the death penalty for Miller. The family said it's still waiting for an apology from Parker. Meanwhile, they'll keep fighting for justice and keep fighting to keep Hope Melton's memory alive. Today we will look at events that occurred in Norris City, Illinois. 22-year-old Jacob Wheeler and his girlfriend, 17-year-old Jessica Evans, went to the Little Wabash River to go fishing. They have not returned home, and their families have not been able to contact them. Police were notified of the couple's disappearance the same day. An investigation was launched, which was followed by all Norris City residents, but unfortunately, the story had no happy ending. What happened shocked all the locals. Between Kentucky and Missouri lies a patchwork of rich farmland and dense forests known as Southern Illinois. The landscape is dotted with small villages like Norris City and White County, with a population of just over 1,000. It's a great place to raise kids. Because it is a small community, many people enjoy outdoor activities such as hunting. There are plenty of places where people enjoy fishing. In 2012, 17-year-old Jessica Evans was living in a cozy house with her mom, Chris. Right before the start of summer vacation at school, Jessica met 22-year-old Jacob Wheeler, who had recently moved to live across the street at his brother's house. They met at a party, got to talking, and really liked each other. Jacob was a quiet country boy who was getting back on his feet after serving 3 years in Iraq. Even though Jacob was 5 years older than Jessica, her mom, Chris, wasn't too worried about it. She trusted him. It was August 26, 2012. Jessica asked her mom for permission to go on a fishing trip with Jacob to the Little Wabash River to fish at night in a well-known spot. Chris didn't like the idea at first, but Jessica was able to talk her into it, and Chris relented. She asked her daughter to be careful not to stay out too long. Jessica's older sister Megan and her son Miles lived on a neighboring street. The next day at 5 a.m., Megan had to go to work, and Jessica had to watch her son. So before Jessica left to go fishing her mom, Chris reminded her that she had to be home no later than 5 a.m. Jessica replied that she remembered that and would be at her sister's house by then. But Jessica had no way of knowing that this fishing trip would be her last. Shortly before midnight, Chris called Jessica on her way to bed to see how she was doing. Jessica said she was fine and that she and Jacob were almost done fishing and would be home soon. But at 5 o'clock the next morning, Chris realizes that her youngest daughter never came home. Being late was not at all like Jessica, especially when she knew she needed to babysit her nephew. Chris picked up her cell phone and started calling her daughter, but Jessica didn't answer. Text messages that Chris wrote went unanswered as well. Chris immediately realized that something was wrong. She was sure that if Jessica had a change of plans, she would have warned her. Chris went to Jacob's house, but his brother Jeremy said Jacob hadn't come home either. Jeremy wasn't worried because he knew Jacob could take care of himself. But by 9 a.m., Jessica's family was beginning to fear the worst. Chris thought Jacob's pickup might have broken down or they were stranded somewhere. Finally, after 12 hours with no sign of the couple, Chris calls the White County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Doug Mayer was relaxing at home when he received a call Sunday night about the missing couple. but Meyer wasn't too concerned. He speculated that perhaps Jacob and Jessica had run away. He figured they were probably okay, but needed to find out where they'd gone. The sheriff decided to execute a warrant to search Jessica's cell phone so the phone company could trace it, but that could take hours. In the meantime, the sheriff's deputies, following the family's instructions, headed to where Jessica and Jacob were supposed to be fishing. It was a very isolated area with only gravel roads leading to it. The deputies followed a 50-foot-long overgrown path to a well-known fishing spot. There were obvious signs that someone had been there. There were some packages. However, there were no signs of any trouble or crime there. There was an extinguished campfire, but the area was really clean. There was no sign of Jacob's pickup truck. So far, the sheriff's gut feeling about the young couple had not failed him. His first thought was not that something bad had happened. It did seem to him that they had probably gone somewhere of their own free will. Finally, the sheriff's deputies got the records from Jessica's cell phone carrier. A great way to find them was to try to track the phone and see which tower it was closest to. They found that the signal was coming from a tower in the campground area. That meant that Jessica's phone was still on and was somewhere near where she and Jacob had gone fishing. It wasn't at all what the sheriff expected if the couple had just run off. If Jessica and Jacob are still around, why aren't they answering their phone calls? Investigators began to fear that the two were stranded somewhere, seriously injured or worse. The news that Jessica and Jacob were missing spread quickly through Norris City, causing concern among the locals. Some thought maybe they'd just run away or something, but Chris was sure Jessica wouldn't do that. And when the sheriff's office learned that her cell phone was still in the area where the couple had gone night fishing, they had an uneasy feeling that something terrible had happened. At dawn the next day, officers from the White County Sheriff's Office returned to the fishing site along with neighboring law enforcement agencies and a platoon of volunteers. The search party set out to look for any sign of Jacob and Jessica. Their families also participated in the search. After 3 hours of searching, there were no results. Neither Jacob, Jessica, nor the pickup truck could be found yet. Even if something happened to Jacob and Jessica, the pickup had to be there. But what if they dumped the phones and ran away? If they did run away together, sooner or later they'd leave an electronic trail. The police checked their bank cards to see if there had been any payments, but there was no activity. While there was nothing of significance in the bank statements, one clue turned up in Jessica's phone records. Police knew about the midnight call from her mom, but apparently Jessica had another phone conversation immediately afterward. That was around 0:30 a.m. Sunday night. Investigators were able to determine who the number belonged to. Jessica was talking to a young man named Ron Wooderson. That name was familiar to the police because Ron had previously had some trouble with the law. So that in itself made the investigators suspicious that he might have had something to do with it. And so they decided that they needed to talk to Ron and determine exactly what that conversation was about. Sheriff's deputies met with him and asked him to recount the last time he spoke to Jessica. He eventually admitted to calling her in the middle of the night. He said that he had been at the party and that there had been a few other people there. Ron claimed that he had called Jessica to try to get her to come and meet him at the party. Jessica was just telling Ron that she was busy fishing when Jacob grabbed the phone. Jacob had strictly forbidden him to call Jessica. According to Ron, they had a pretty heated conversation. It was mostly on Jacob's part. He really didn't like that Ron called his girlfriend. Jacob was pretty upset about his call. The sheriff's deputies took down the names of the other partygoers and checked Ron's alibi, and they kind of vouched for him that he didn't leave after that phone call, that he stayed there. By the end of the day, the tired members of the search were about to go home without finding anything. But one of Jacob's friends, who was riding his ATV, found a pickup truck in the woods. The pickup was parked in the woods behind an old abandoned farmhouse, 2 miles from where Jacob and Jessica were fishing. It was Jacob's pickup. It was clear that something terrible had happened. In the back of the truck was the body of a woman. She had been shot twice in the head. Another cause for concern was the condition she was in. She was partially clothed. Some of her clothes were lying on the ground next to the car, and this immediately led investigators to believe that more than just a murder had occurred. The victim had no ID, but in a community like this one, that wasn't necessary. Some of the investigators had known Jessica all her life, and it was Jessica they had just found. In that moment, everything changed. Nearly 36 hours after Jessica failed to show up to babysit her nephew, the sheriff's office found her shot to death in Jacob's abandoned pickup truck. She was wearing almost no clothes, leading to the obvious conclusions that she had had contact with a man before her death and that she was against it. If that was indeed the case, authorities hoped the coroner would be able to collect the perpetrator's DNA. Meanwhile, police officers scoured the area around the pickup truck for evidence, and they got lucky. There were two .22 caliber shell casings, so obviously it was consistent with the fact that Jessica had 2 head wounds. The 2 shell casings were found on the right side of the truck, next to a large bloodstain. So it was obvious that Jessica had been shot where the pickup truck was parked. Investigators began to examine Jacob's pickup truck. It was full of fishing gear and personal items, but the strangest thing was that Jacob wasn't there. The police officers got a clue when they looked inside the pickup truck. They found blood in the driver's side cab of the truck. Blood samples were sent for DNA testing. They needed to figure out who it belonged to, and they needed to find Jacob. The police couldn't help but wonder if Jacob was another victim or if he was the man who had shot Jessica. Police officers continued to comb the area trying to find Jacob. At that time, they had to consider him more as a suspect. It wasn't just the investigators who had doubts. There was a part of the community that believed Jacob had something to do with what happened to Jessica. Many speculated that Jacob, after years spent in the army, had been trained to take someone's life. Perhaps it was that late-night phone call from Ron that set Jacob off. Investigators began to worry about what kind of mood Jacob might have been in if he thought he was going to lose Jessica. The day after Jessica's body was discovered, the police obtained a search warrant for Jacob's brother's house, assuming he was hiding in the house. They found no sign of Jacob, but they did make an important discovery. Investigators noticed that one of the guns was missing from his collection. Jeremy, Jacob's brother, explained that this was no cause for alarm. His brother was simply taking precautions before a fishing trip. There was nothing unusual about it. Investigators became alarmed when they heard that the missing gun was a .22 caliber. That matched the shell casings found at the crime scene and therefore raised some concerns. But Jacob's family believed he was not involved in the crime. They were certain that Jacob would have sacrificed his own life to protect Jessica if she had been in danger. As the week passed, the search for Jacob Wheeler turned into a large-scale operation. Police officers from several counties formed search teams and took all possible measures to find him. Canine services were involved in the search, and an airplane was taken into the air for surveillance. The White County Crime Suppression Unit put up a reward of $2,000 for information that would lead to Jacob's capture and arrest. The cash reward generated some interest, and the sheriff's office began receiving calls with tips. One tip stood out from the rest. There was a report that Jacob had been seen at a gas station. An employee at the gas station, located 12 miles from where Jessica's body was found, reported that he believed Jacob had bought a pack of cigarettes Sunday night, about a day after he and Jessica disappeared. He was wearing a camouflage hooded sweatshirt. The gas station employee remembered that when the man pulled cash out of his wallet, there was also an ID card there, and it appeared to him that it was an ID card in the name of Jacob Wheeler. This obviously made Jacob the prime suspect in what happened to Jessica. As time went on, the possibility that he was on the run became more and more likely. Investigators went to the gas station where Jacob was allegedly seen. They looked at the surveillance footage and saw a suspicious man. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt that covered his face and never looked at the camera. The night was too hot for a warm jacket and it was suspicious, but it was hard to say for sure that it was Jacob. The man quickly bought cigarettes and left. The surveillance footage from the gas station didn't show the man's face, but a second camera outside showed him getting into a car driven by a woman. It was a woman one of the sheriff's deputies recognized. They immediately drove to her house. The car they saw on the gas station's camera footage was parked near the house. While talking to investigators, the woman admitted to driving the man to the gas station, but said it was not Jacob Wheeler. She said it was her boyfriend. The moment they saw her boyfriend, it was a huge disappointment to them. It wasn't Jacob Wheeler, it was just someone who looked like him. The mystery man in the video is a dead end. All of the police's attention remained focused on Jacob. The detectives were convinced he was alive and suspected that his brother Jeremy was hiding him. They searched his house at night, trying to catch him off guard, but despite a second search, they found no signs that Jacob was at home after he disappeared. His brother and father were convinced that Jacob couldn't have taken Jessica's life. Harold Wheeler wanted to clear his son's name. It wasn't easy, because he was sure he was looking for Jacob's body, not himself. 6 days after the disappearance, Sheriff Meyer received a call from Jacob's father, Harold, saying that he had discovered something that everyone else had overlooked. He said he thought he saw some car parts in a wooded area just a quarter-mile from where Jacob and Jessica were camping. Investigators decided to check out this information and indeed found some car parts. These were parts that attached to the fenders of the pickup truck. In the area where they found these parts, there was damage to the trees, and it suggested that someone drove the pickup into the woods and drove between the trees, causing damage to the vehicle. But it certainly wasn't Jacob Wheeler's pickup truck. The investigators didn't know if the find was connected to the crime, but it was definitely of interest, and they had no other leads. One of the parts had a serial number on it. By checking it online, the police were able to determine exactly what kind of pickup truck it was. Again, in a small city, it's not hard to find where this truck might be located. One of the sheriff's deputies knew a man who drives a vehicle like this. It was Danny Costin, a 36-year-old electrician and White County native. But could he have been involved in such a violent crime? Danny had never been a troublemaker. He had no criminal record. He was a regular White County resident and easy to find. Investigators decided to go to Danny's workplace and talk to him. His pickup truck was parked in the parking lot. The truck had significant damage that matched the parts found in the woods. While the investigators scrutinized the pickup truck, Sheriff Meyer questioned Danny. He asked about the damage on his pickup truck. Danny explained that he had tried to fish on the Little Wabash River, but had trouble launching the boat because he was heavily intoxicated. He didn't remember most of the evening, but he did remember the date. It was the night Jacob and Jessica went fishing, and the time was about 1 a.m., and he said he never saw anyone else in that area of the river the whole time he was there. Meanwhile, investigators made an important discovery. They found quite a bit of blood in the back of Danny's pickup truck. He seemed surprised when they told him about it. The sheriff told Danny that if there was something he wanted to tell him, now would be a good time to do it. Danny stated that he was in the woods that night and saw Jacob shoot Jessica twice, but that didn't explain how there was blood in the back of Danny's pickup truck. Analysis showed it was human blood. Investigators brought Danny to the police station and questioned him again. He said he was drunk. He went down to the Little Wabash River and saw Jacob and Jessica. Jacob had gone into the woods, so he was alone with Jessica. Danny said Jessica allegedly started hitting on him on her own. He said he and Jessica sneaked off in his truck and parked 2 miles away behind an old abandoned farmhouse. They allegedly had consensual, intimate contact. But then, as Danny claimed, Jacob found them. In the pitch darkness, he and Jessica started arguing, and then Jacob shot Jessica. According to Danny, he was scared when he saw Jacob coming toward him. He was able to grab him, and a struggle ensued between them. Somehow the gun went off and wounded Jacob. Danny claimed that the shot was accidental. He began to panic. He put Jacob in the back of his pickup truck. He was afraid that no one would believe him, that it was self-defense, and so he hid the body where no one could find it. Danny described in some detail where he had left Jacob's body. The police didn't believe Danny's story. It didn't seem like something Jessica would do. Danny's story of Jessica going with him and Jacob showing up out of the blue didn't really make much sense. But now they knew that Danny had shot Jacob, which meant that Jacob's family had been right all along. Danny Costin was arrested and taken to jail. At that time, the investigators went to the area where Danny said he had left Jacob's body. It was a dirt road, and they had to go a little deeper into the woods. After 6 days of searching, they finally found Jacob with a bullet in his head. The evidence they found didn't match what Danny Costin said happened that night. There was blood inside Jacob's pickup, on the driver's seat and the door, and that blood belonged to Jacob. It just didn't fit Danny's story. He said that Jacob killed Jessica, and then they fought in the woods, and Jacob died from an accidental gunshot. Danny had previously stated that he put the body in the back of his own pickup truck and drove it to a remote location. So where did the blood in the interior of Jacob's pickup truck come from? Danny Costin began to be reinterrogated, and when inconsistencies in his testimony were pointed out to him, he agreed to tell the truth. According to him, that night he tried to drive his truck to the water to launch the boat, but the woods were too thick. He was also very drunk. He saw Jacob and Jessica and tried to get them to help him. Jacob saw that he was drunk and said it wasn't a good idea. Danny then asked the couple to help him get home. Jacob agreed. Jacob and Jessica got into Jacob's pickup truck, and Danny climbed into the back. He had a .22 caliber pistol and for some reason decided to use it. He climbed out of the back of the truck, went to the driver's door, and shot Jacob in the head through the lowered window. It all happened in front of Jessica. She was frightened and started screaming. Then, according to Danny, he pulled Jacob out of the truck. During questioning, he swore he didn't know why he killed Jacob or why he did what he did afterward. Jessica told Danny that she would do anything to keep him from killing her. The sheriff asked Danny Costin if Jessica had offered to become intimate with him in exchange for him letting her live. Costin replied, "She said she would do whatever I wanted." He went to a secluded place. Thus, he essentially interpreted Jessica's attempt at self-preservation as an offer to become intimate with him. He did it in the back of Jacob's pickup truck. He then drew a gun, and despite Jessica begging for her life, he shot her. Costin claimed he didn't know why he did it. After putting Jessica's body in the back of Jacob's pickup truck, he drove his own truck to Wayne County to hide Jacob's body. On the way, he threw his gun and Jacob's gun out the window. Police were never able to find either gun. On September 4th, 2012, Danny Costin appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He decided to recant his testimony and claimed he was not read his rights before being questioned, but an appeals court rejected his appeal. Video recordings of the interrogation confirmed that Danny Costin was read his rights. Plus, police had overwhelming evidence to corroborate Danny's confession. His truck had Jacob's blood in it, and Jessica's body had his DNA on it. In January 2014, a jury found 31-year-old Candace Brown, Danny Costin's girlfriend, guilty of lying to authorities. During the initial phase of the investigation, she provided Costin with a false alibi. Brown was sentenced to 60 days in jail, 30 months probation, 100 hours of community service, and ordered to pay various court costs and fines. On August 20th, 2013, Danny Costin was found guilty. He was sentenced to 53 years in prison. Judge Tom Foster said he was bound by the agreement of the state and defense in sentencing Costin, but he felt the defendant deserved a harsher punishment. The court believes you executed these two people. There is no forgiveness or excuse for that. Not in this world or any other, the judge said. Costin agreed to waive a jury trial in exchange for lesser charges and a reduced sentence if convicted. Foster said the court only accepted the agreement because the victims' families had consented to it. After the hearing, Jacob's father, Harold Wheeler, said he never believed his son, who was identified by law enforcement as a person of interest in Jessica Evans' death, was capable of such an offense. "I knew he would never do something like this. I started looking for him Sunday, and I never stopped," he said. Costin, he said, was an acquaintance who lived about a quarter mile from the Wheeler residence, and his arrest for the murders was unexpected. "I've sat at his campsite and drank a beer with him. He's been in my house," a visibly pained Harold Wheeler said of Costin. Tiffany Adams was 20 years old when she disappeared on November 5, 2014 in Sullivan, Indiana. She was 8 months pregnant at the time of her disappearance. Tiffany left her father's home to visit her mother, who lived in the house next door. She never showed up at her mother's house and was never seen again. Her family reported her missing on November 7th, 2 days after she was last seen. Sullivan is a city in Hamilton Township and the county seat of Sullivan County, Indiana, United States. As of the 2010 census, the population was just over 4,000. Many young people think about leaving Sullivan and moving to a bigger city. After Tiffany graduated from high school and her boyfriend, Donnie Barron, found out that Tiffany was pregnant. She was happy, excited, constantly talking about the baby and how happy she was. She was very excited that the baby was on the way and approaching her due date. But on November 5, 2014, when Tiffany was 8 months pregnant, her family's life changed irrevocably. Tiffany was gone. Her boyfriend, Donnie Barron, and her father, Bruce Adams, began looking for her, but Tiffany was nowhere to be seen. She wasn't answering her phone calls, and no one knew where she might be or what had happened to her. Adding to the worry was the fact that she was pregnant. Pregnant women don't just disappear. Something was wrong. Bruce Adams, Tiffany Adams' father, didn't call police on November 5th, the day she went missing. He thought he had to wait 48 hours before a report could be filed. It's a common misconception that when a person goes missing, you should wait 24 or 48 hours. In fact, you should never wait. If you have someone missing, you need to call the police immediately. So Bruce didn't contact the police until November 7th. He told the sheriff that on November 5th, he left Tiffany and Donnie at his house and went out. He was gone for about an hour, and when he returned, only Donnie was in the house. So Bruce asked Donnie where Tiffany was. Donnie replied that she was at her mom's house, Christina, who lived a short walk away. Bruce Adams was not actually Tiffany Adams's biological father. Her biological father had played no role in her life since she was born. The sheriff met with Christina, Tiffany's mother, but she did not know where her daughter might be. According to Christina, the last time she saw Tiffany was October 30th, 5 days before she disappeared. To find out what happened to Tiffany and where she may be as soon as possible, a detective from the state police was brought in to investigate. In investigations like this one, police immediately focus on the people closest to the disappeared person. The detective wanted to talk to Tiffany's boyfriend first, since Donnie was the last person to see her. But it turned out that Donnie had left town and no one knew where he was. The fact that he left town right after his pregnant girlfriend disappeared was a serious concern. At this point in the investigation, the police had 2 prime suspects in Tiffany's disappearance: Bruce Adams, Tiffany's stepfather, and Donnie Barron, her boyfriend, but he was nowhere to be found. The news that Tiffany was missing spread quickly through Sullivan. When such a young woman, 8 months pregnant, goes missing, it affects people so much more because she had her whole life ahead of her. There were rumors that she had been kidnapped, but at the same time everyone hoped she would just come home. There were a lot of rumors that Tiffany didn't run away anywhere. People said they had seen her, but those were just rumors. Since the police did not know where Donnie was, they focused their attention on Bruce Adams. Bruce stated that his alibi was that he went to the store, and while he was at the store, Tiffany left his house. The detective went to the grocery store and found out that Bruce did go in there on November 5th, but that may not have meant anything because the exact time of Tiffany's disappearance was unknown. Bruce was very worried about Tiffany's disappearance. He said that he would never hurt her. He loved her like his own daughter. He participated in the search for her and hoped that she would return home unharmed. Bruce pointed police to another suspect. While talking to a detective, Bruce said Brian Orr, who was married to Tiffany's mother, Christina, was responsible for Tiffany's disappearance. Let me remind you that according to Bruce, he went to the grocery store on November 5th, and when he returned home, Tiffany was not there. Bruce also shared other important information. Around 1 p.m. on November 5th, 2014, Bruce received 3 phone calls on his landline phone from Tiffany's cell phone. When Bruce answered the first call, he heard a man's voice in the background before the call was disconnected. When he answered the second call, he did not hear anything. However, the second call was also disconnected. When Bruce answered the third call, he again heard a male voice yelling in the background. Bruce testified that during one of the phone calls he heard commotion and Tiffany's voice saying, "Dad, Dad." Bruce then placed approximately 10 calls to Tiffany's cell phone. All of his calls to Tiffany's cell phone were routed to voicemail. Bruce believed that the man who had yelled at Tiffany was Brian Orr, and he believed that Brian had attacked Tiffany because Brian didn't get along with her. It was important information, and it needed to be verified. The detective talked to Tiffany's friend to find out what her relationship with her new stepfather was like. Tiffany's friend revealed that Tiffany never said anything nice about her stepfather, Brian Orr. She often talked about how he called her various bad words, about how she couldn't visit her mom because of him, and about how Brian wouldn't let Tiffany talk to her mom unless she was on speakerphone. Obviously, Brian Orr was controlling her, and that made him another suspect. The police needed to find out why he was preventing Tiffany from communicating with her mother, and if he had an alibi for the day she disappeared. Tiffany expressed her feelings on social media. She wrote a post about her mom going back to Brian Orr. Tiffany was upset about this and did not speak well of Brian in her post. What if Brian saw this post by Tiffany and got mad at her about it? Could her mother have been hiding something? There were a lot of questions that the police needed to answer. To clarify the relationships of all the people I've previously mentioned in this video, I'll take a moment to do so. So, at the time of Tiffany's disappearance, her mother Christina was married to Brian Orr. Prior to her marriage to Brian, Christina was married to Bruce Adams. Bruce was not Tiffany's biological father, but he married Christina around the time Tiffany was born, and he took on the responsibility and role of Tiffany's father. Bruce's house and Brian and Christina's house were within walking distance, so Brian and Christina's house could be seen from Bruce's yard. Brian and Christina had developed a strained relationship with Bruce. I hope I haven't confused you further. Please share your opinion in the comments. 6 days after Tiffany disappeared, on November 11, 2014, police came with a search warrant to Christina and Brian's home. The couple was not thrilled that police officers were searching their residence. They were looking for anything that could link Tiffany to their home, any signs of a struggle, anything that could give a clue as to where Tiffany might be. During the search, officers found a security camera on a pole that was pointed at the driveway of Brian and Christina Orr's home. Upon closer examination, it appeared to be a camera trap that responded to motion. It was important for the police to find the footage from this camera because they believed it could help them find out the truth about what happened to Tiffany. But as it turned out, the camera didn't have a memory card, and thus there was no recording either. Could it have been a mere coincidence, or had someone deliberately removed the memory card because it could have been an important piece of evidence? Police were considering all possible theories. At the time, Brian Orr was a suspect, but there was no evidence that he was involved in Tiffany's disappearance. At the beginning of the investigation, Tiffany's boyfriend, Donnie Barron, was a potential suspect. When Bruce reported Tiffany missing, the last person to see Tiffany alive was Donnie, but he had left town. Eventually, the sheriff was able to track him down and talk to him. Donnie said he was in love with Tiffany, but he didn't understand why she was gone like that. Who could she have been with? Donnie dreamed of helping Tiffany raise the baby. But if he had all these plans, why was he hiding? Why wasn't he helping with the investigation and the search? Could Donnie have hurt Tiffany in any way? Donnie had a weak alibi. He was the only one who could confirm that he was alone in Bruce's house when it was discovered that Tiffany was missing. Another important fact came to light. Donnie was not actually the father of Tiffany's baby. The biological father of the baby was Paul Artem McHenry. In high school, Artem was every girl's dream. He was strong and muscular, and all the girls at school wanted him to pay attention to them. Tiffany and Artem were together for about 3 years, but broke up around March 2014. After that, she went from a relationship with Artem to a relationship with Donnie very quickly. When Tiffany found out she was pregnant, she was surprised. She didn't know who the father of the baby was, Donnie or Artem. At the time, everyone hoped that the baby was Donnie's because she and Artem had broken up. However, After she had an ultrasound and found out the gestational age, she realized that the baby was Artem's. She was very excited. Tiffany and Artem's relationship was complicated, and their breakup was not easy either. Tiffany published this post on October 1st, 2014. She wrote, "Looks like my baby boy Sil be growing up with me taking both roles as a mom and dad. My baby's father is seriously worthless. He just informed me he was going to sign his rights over and he didn't know if he could handle this." After Donnie found out that Tiffany was pregnant and that Artem was the baby's father, he just accepted it. Artem McHenry became another suspect, so the sheriff met with him and talked to him. He said he was at work on November 5th, 30 miles from Sullivan. His alibi was eventually confirmed. Days went by, then weeks, but there was no progress in the investigation until December 30th, 2014, when 55 days had passed since the disappearance. Next, I'm going to read an excerpt from the official report, which says, and I quote, "Tiffany was reported missing on November 7th, 2014. Law enforcement efforts to locate her were unsuccessful. Tiffany's body was eventually discovered on December 30th, 2014, by two Sullivan County farmers in a field where they were belatedly harvesting corn. Her body had decomposed, and animals had disturbed it. A red fleece jacket was knotted around Tiffany's neck, and a leaf was found within the knot. Tiffany's cell phone was not found with her body. It's important to note that the leaf was inside the knot, meaning that the jacket was tied around Tiffany's neck, not somewhere else, but in a cornfield. At first, the farmer thought he saw a mannequin, but as he got closer, he realized it wasn't a mannequin at all. It was the body of a young woman. She had dark hair. She was wearing brown boots. Remarkably, her body did not decompose much because November and December in 2014 were very cold. The court documents say the following, and I quote, "The pathologist conducted an autopsy on December 31st, 2014, and determined that the cause of Tiffany's death was ligature strangulation. Her body had sustained a broken rib from an unknown cause. The pathologist determined that the fetus Tiffany carried was viable and, essentially, suffocated due to Tiffany's death." The police had a lot of questions. How could this have happened? Who had done this? How could someone be so cruel to hurt someone so badly? How could someone be so cruel to take not only Tiffany's life, but another life that hadn't even begun yet? As Tiffany's body was exposed to the elements, important pieces of information, including DNA, were washed away, making the investigation extremely difficult. Tiffany's phone records provided very important information to the investigation because investigators were able to track the numbers she called, the people she talked to, and the people she sent text messages to. In this case, they learned that before Tiffany Adams disappeared, she was texting with Amber Orr. Amber Orr is the wife of Jonas Orr. Brian Orr is Jonas's father and Tiffany's stepfather. Jonas and Amber had a 4-year-old son, and Tiffany sometimes looked after him. It was important to talk to Amber because she may have been one of the last people to communicate with Tiffany. When investigators first spoke to Amber, she said that she and Jonas shared a cell phone and took turns using it. Through further investigation, detectives found that it was not unusual for Tiffany and Amber to text each other. Detectives wanted to check the cell phone that Jonas and Amber had at the time Tiffany went missing. However, by the time investigators spoke to Jonas and Amber, they already had a new phone. They said they went to rent a video the day Tiffany disappeared, and police were able to confirm with the video store that Jonas and Amber were there that day. Police couldn't find Tiffany's phone, but they were able to track its movements on the day she disappeared. After Tiffany left her father's house, her phone ended up in different places in a short period of time. This clearly indicated that she was in a car and was able to travel such a distance in such a short time. But Tiffany did not own a car. At that point, Tiffany's boyfriend, Donnie Barron, and Tiffany's stepfather, Brian Orr, were still at the top of the suspect list. However, police were able to determine that Donnie had not left Bruce's house when Tiffany went missing. Now, Brian Orr and his alibi for the day Tiffany went missing had to be checked. Brian and Christina told investigators that they weren't even home that day. They were renovating an apartment on the outskirts of town, and didn't return home until the evening. Cell phone records showed that Tiffany was outside her mother's house at 11:15 a.m. that day. After that, her cell phone was turned off for approximately 39 minutes. The next time the phone turned on, it moved to the area where her body was found. The last known location of her phone was Lake Sullivan. One of the most important questions was whose car Tiffany was traveling in and whether the driver of that car was involved in her death. During further investigation, police learned that on the day Tiffany disappeared, her half-brother Jonas Orr had borrowed a Chevrolet Blazer from his buddy Jim Fish. Jim was working at a sawmill, and Jonas was supposed to drive there to return the Blazer, but Jonas was about 6 hours late. He told Jim that the Blazer had broken down and the delay was due to that. What you are seeing now is an excerpt from a court document that goes into more detail. If you are interested, you can pause this video and read what it says. For those who don't watch the video but only listen, I'll reiterate that you need to pay attention to the fact that Jonas returned the Blazer 6 hours late. Jonas Orr found himself at the center of an investigation. Jonas and Amber said they were at the video store when Tiffany went missing. The detectives did go back to the video store that Amber and Jonas said they were at. Their receipts confirmed that they were there. However, they had visited the video store that day much later than investigators had originally thought. This meant that theoretically, they could have been involved in what happened to Tiffany. As I mentioned earlier, the last place Tiffany's phone was active was Lake Sullivan. What the dive team did, the police considered it a miracle. They found the phone. Here's what the official report on Tiffany's phone says, and I quote, "On August 27, 2015, Tiffany's cell phone was found in Lake Sullivan, approximately 1/2 mile from where Jonas told Sheriff Cottam the Blazer had broken down on the day Tiffany went missing. All of the text messages on Tiffany's cell phone that were sent on the date of her disappearance had been deleted from her cell phone when it was found. Later, however, the Indiana State Police Cyber Crimes Unit was able to recover the deleted messages word for word. After reviewing the messages, investigators learned that Jonas had been texting his wife Amber using Tiffany's cell phone. Tiffany had a new phone number. Amber did not know her phone number, and that is why Amber did not recognize the number when she received the text message. She later learned that it was Jonas texting from Tiffany's phone. Amber was thus eliminated as a suspect. Amber Orr filed for divorce in November 2015. Police were able to recover all of the text messages. If you are interested, you can stop the video and read excerpts from the court documents that contain all the information about the text messages. At the first interview, Jonas claimed that he last saw Tiffany in September 2014 at the Dollar General store where a family dispute arose and the police were called to the scene. Jonas told Sheriff Cottam that on the day Tiffany went missing, Jim's Blazer broke down near County Road 300 North and County Road 75 East, about 1 mile from the sawmill. Jonas told the sheriff that he had flagged down a car with 2 strangers in it who offered to jump the Blazer. The strangers allowed him to use their cell phone so that he could contact his wife, Amber. Jonas stated that he sent a text message to Amber using the stranger's cell phone. After restarting the Blazer, he allowed it to idle for a few minutes. He then returned the cell phone to the strangers and drove directly to the sawmill. He indicated that the encounter with the strangers lasted approximately 20 minutes. Jonas told the sheriff that when he arrived at the sawmill, he then asked to borrow Jim's cell phone. At that point, he called Amber and told her where to pick him up. Jonas denied any involvement in the death of Tiffany Adams. He could not imagine that the police would be able to find Tiffany's phone and recover all the text messages. An Indiana State Police Laboratory forensic scientist examined possible evidence collected from Jim's Blazer. The scientist confirmed that red fibers found in Jim's vehicle could have originated from the red fleece jacket that was found knotted around Tiffany's neck. Jonas Orr was arrested. He has been charged in connection with the deaths of Tiffany and her unborn child. Police believe that on November 5, 2014, after Tiffany left Bruce Adams's home, she headed to her mother Christina's home, but neither Christina nor her husband Brian Orr was home. At some point, Jonas intercepted Tiffany in Jim's borrowed car. Jonas drove Tiffany to a cornfield where he took her life. After he threw Tiffany's cell phone into the lake, Jonas returned to his father's house and pulled the memory card from the hunting camera to get rid of evidence of Tiffany getting into his car. Brian Orr was taken off the suspect list. The possible motive for the crime is the complicated relationship between Jonas and Tiffany. Jonas disliked Tiffany very much, and there was a long-standing feud between them. Jonas was very close to his father. He may have been angered by what Tiffany wrote on social media about his father. But what must be in a man's mind to do such a thing to a pregnant young woman? It defies explanation. Do you think Jonas regretted what he did to Tiffany? Take a few seconds to think about it. So here's what the court documents say, and I quote, John Klein, who was incarcerated with Jonas from August 2015 through February 2016, also testified as a witness for the state. He testified that while he and Jonas were in jail watching a television show about a cold case murder investigation, Klein commented to Jonas that he found it hard to believe that someone could avoid talking about a crime like that for so long. Jonas responded, "You'd be amazed at what you can live with when you have to." Klein further testified that on another occasion, Jonas indicated that he did not feel sorry about what he did to Tiffany, but that he felt badly about the baby. Per Klein, Jonas asked Klein if he thought that God would forgive him. Jonas Orr pleaded not guilty. In July 2016, he was sentenced to 2 60-year prison terms to be served consecutively.